Tonight we ease quietly into one of the grimmest, most grueling, yet strangely romanticized adventures in American history. We are speaking of the Oregon Trail, that ultimate choose-your-own disaster crossing of a continent. You have almost certainly heard of it, perhaps even perished of dysentery on an old classroom machine years ago. But now the story unfolds around you, so that you may live every mile of it. Dim whatever lights remain if you wish, settle deeper into wherever you rest, and let the soft rhythm of wooden wheels and distant oxen carry you forward into the journey. It begins in the spring of 1846. You have spent the long Missouri winter watching snow melt from the eaves and waiting for the frozen earth to soften. April arrives, and the air in Independence hums with a quiet, electric tension. Dozens of families like yours stand with wagons lined for days, oxen steaming in the morning chill. You are leaving behind a modest farmhouse, the tree you loved, the streets of your town, and perhaps relatives who believe you have taken leave of your senses. Yet you carry gold-tinted dreams and soft whispers of lush farmland waiting in Oregon territory. In truth, you do not know what lies ahead. You only know it must be better than the debts, the over-farmed soil, and yet another year of insufficient rain. An odd energy moves through the gathering. Some faces shine with almost childlike excitement, treating the departure like a grand holiday. Others already wear the distant thousand-yard stare of those who have imagined every possible burial. You stand somewhere between the two. You have packed and repacked and packed again. You have argued quietly with your spouse over whether the rocking chair must come. You have purchased enough flour to bake bread for an entire cavalry regiment. And still a low, nagging certainty remains that something, perhaps many things, will go badly wrong. Your wagon feels solid enough, or so the man who sold it insisted. The canvas top stretches tight over wooden bows, giving shade but little else. Inside you have forced barrels of bacon and beans, the small iron stove you refused to leave behind, despite every warning that it was dead weight, rifles, a cast iron skillet, a coffee grinder, and one slightly crushed porcelain doll for your daughter. Already you wonder whether the load is too heavy. You hear the oxen before you see them, great snorting beasts whose eyes seem older than any civilization. You are told they are better than horses. Slower, yes, but steadier, and far less likely to snap a leg. You rest a hand against one massive side and receive in return a sound that is equal parts boredom and mild disgust. The road ahead will be long. On the morning of departure, the town is a soft chaos of crying children, sharp words between parents, and quiet arguments over who will serve as wagon master. You do not want the position. It is little more than glorified babysitting, in which every wrong turn, every lost ox, every misjudged river depth will be laid at your feet. Yet you also do not want the loud man named Lester to hold it. He once tried to trade a live chicken for a haircut. The quiet farmer from Ohio is chosen instead. He seems less likely to drive the company into a canyon. Your first steps onto the trail feel strangely ordinary. There is no trumpet, no sweeping vista of prairie grass, only a muddy track and the steady creak of wooden wheels. The truth settles over you like a sack of flour. You will walk a great deal. Riding inside the wagon means being thrown against barrels and crushed by shifting cargo. So you walk, as nearly everyone does except the elderly and the already injured. A complicated mixture of feeling follows. A flicker of excitement rises when the last general store falls behind. Fear arrives the moment everything familiar disappears. The trees thin, the houses vanish, and the land rolls out flat and wide. It is beautiful in a desolate way, as though you have stepped onto another planet made entirely of grass and insects. The insects are immediate and relentless. By the first night you have slapped more mosquitoes than you can count, and learned that prairie gnats fly deliberately into the eyes. You make camp beside a lazy creek, and everyone pretends for a while that this is still an adventure. Fires are coaxed into life. A few soft songs are sung. Someone attempts a joke. Yet weariness has already settled deep. Your boots feel stiff. The children ask again and again when you will arrive. And when you finally lie on a blanket beneath the wagon because tent space is scarce, you listen to the distant lowing of oxen, the rhythmic snoring of the family next to yours, and what might be a coyote or a very sick mule. The ground is harder than expected. Your hip already aches. Above you, the stars form an ocean of silver, so wide and clear it feels possible to fall upward into them. You tell yourself the journey will be worth it, that in 6 months you will stand on your own land, beneath your own roof. For the present, you cannot quite silence the thought that you have made the greatest mistake of your life. Here is the quiet historical fact of the night. Roughly 400,000 people traveled the Oregon Trail between the 1830s and the 1860s. That is the population of a modern city emptied and set walking 2,000 miles across unforgiving ground, with nothing but wooden wagons and fragile hope. Some actually brought pianos, real upright pianos. Most of those instruments were abandoned along the way, forming a strange trail of broken strings and unfinished dreams. Scholars still gently argue whether the journey was driven more by religious conviction, economic desperation, or simple restless wonder. The truth is probably all three, mixed with a large measure of not knowing what waited beyond the next rise. By the second day, your feet already despise you. You wake feeling as though your own oxen have walked across you in the night, which is not entirely impossible, given how they startle at coyotes. Your back is sore from the hard ground. Your eyes are crusted with dust, and your boots feel like instruments of medieval torture. Still you rise with the sun because trail life allows no other choice. There are no soft buttons to press for a few more minutes of sleep. Only the sounds of creaking wheels, complaining chickens, and someone already shouting about lost coffee beans. You force down a breakfast of damp cornbread and coffee made from yesterday's grounds, then return to the same slow rhythm. Pack the camp, settle the children, yoke the oxen, and curse the decision that placed your entire life inside a rolling wooden box to be dragged across half a continent. By the 10th mile, it becomes painfully clear that riding in the wagon is a fantasy. The constant jostling could loosen a spine. Every rut and rock becomes a full-body event. Walking is not smoother, but at least your brain remains seated inside your skull. The wagons groan like ships stranded on dry land, while your feet strike the hard-packed earth in a steady, dragging cadence. You had imagined something closer to the adventures in the cheap novels sold back home. What you did not imagine was the pure mind-numbing repetition. Wake, walk, eat, walk, make camp, sleep, and begin again. And this is only the beginning. Mid-morning brings another realization. Your fellow travelers are beginning to irritate you in small, accumulating ways. 50 strangers living in tight quarters with little water and a great many beans produces tension as naturally as the sun rises. Someone's dog will not stop chasing the chickens. Another man insists on playing a fiddle while he walks, and somehow manages to be off-key on a single string. A woman hums the same hymn without pause, as though it were a protective spell. Yet there is still a rough comfort in the group, like a slow herd of anxious buffalo moving together. You travel in loose clusters, 3 or 4 wagons abreast when the trail allows, arguing quietly about whether the pace is good enough. Friendships form, small grudges settle in, and vague alliances appear as though the entire company has become a rolling reality of its own. There is always one couple arguing by the evening fire, someone who is only a little ill, yet coughs as though the illness is larger, and one man who will not stop speaking of the land claim waiting for him in Oregon as though he already owns half the territory. You try to keep your spirits level. The scenery is changing. You are leaving the scrubby edges of Missouri and entering the open plains. Golden waves of grass that move with every breath of wind. It is beautiful, and it is endless. The land stretches forever, flat and shimmering, with no tree in sight. The trail itself is nothing more than 2 dusty grooves beaten into the earth by the thousands of wagons that passed before you, a long rut of history that you now walk inside. You come to know your wagon in ways you never wished to know any object. Every creak is a new source of worry. Every sudden lurch means something inside has shifted, almost certainly for the worse. The back wheel threatens constantly to depart. The canvas flaps in the wind as though mocking the entire enterprise. Inside, everything remains packed tight. Barrels, bedding, tools, yet somehow the air always smells of wet wood and old cheese. You tried to keep the load orderly, but the first time the wheels dropped into a pothole the size of a bathtub, your careful arrangement became a chaotic stew of flour, boots, and quiet shame. The oxen, bless their slow and slobbery hearts, are the true strength of the company. They are slow, yes, but strong and stubborn in the way the trail demands. You begin speaking to them out of boredom and a growing suspicion that they possess more sense than some of the human members of the party. You give them ridiculous names, Butterscotch and Thunderhoof, and find that the naming helps. When Thunderhoof stops mid-stride to relieve himself, you simply step around the result as though you have been doing so all your life. Around midday, the company finally halts. The heat has become a solid presence. Your shirt clings to your back, and you have drunk more water than you thought possible while still feeling dry. The wagons circle near a sparse patch of trees, blessed shade, and someone passes around biscuits that taste of flour and mild regret. You stretch, check the wheels, and try to ignore the growing cloud of flies that has discovered the food. Someone suggests pushing another 5 miles before dark. A collective groan moves through the camp. This, you understand now, is the true nature of the Oregon Trail. It is not yet the cholera. It is the constant motion, the monotony, the way the body begins to rebel while the mind slowly goes numb. You have covered barely 30 miles and already feel a year older. Your muscles ache, your nerves fray, and every small sound, an ox snorting, a child complaining about dry bread, feels like a personal offense. Historically, the average daily distance on a good stretch was 15 to 20 miles. Not every day is good. Rain, broken wheels, sick animals, all of it slows the company. And you have not yet met a true obstacle. This is still the easy portion, the long warm-up, a quiet quirk of the trail. Some travelers brought homemade seats that hung from the canvas ribs like hammocks, so they might escape the worst of the jostling. Most of those seats snapped or dumped their occupants straight into the flour barrels at the first rough patch. You once watched a woman hanging upside down like a startled bat, legs tangled in her own bonnet, shouting at her husband. Scholars still debate why so many pioneers assumed they would simply figure everything out once they reached Oregon. Many had never farmed, never built a proper house, never hunted for survival. They simply believed the land would provide. Whether that belief was pure optimism or the most determined group manifestation in history remains unsettled. By the time camp is made again, your boots are caked with mud, your legs feel like soft jelly, and your youngest has developed a mysterious rash you are too tired to examine closely. You lie back under the wagon, body bruised and still warm from the late sun, and stare up at the underside of your rolling home. It has been only 2 days, and already you understand something essential. This trail is going to strip you down to whatever remains when comfort and illusion are gone. There will be only you, the road, and a great deal of walking. By the end of the first week, the journey has become less a solitary effort and more a slowly unraveling small town traveling on wheels. Your wagon is no longer solely yours. It belongs to a larger caravan of roughly 20 families, bound together by shared desperation, wild ambition, and the quiet hope that someone else packed more beans than you did. Survival out here depends not only on strength or endurance, but on teamwork, constant small politics, and endless compromise. Every morning begins with a gathering. The wagon master, still the quiet man from Ohio, calls the company together and lays out the route for the day. He remains calm and reasonable, which is probably why several people are already preparing in their minds to replace him. Decisions must be made constantly. Will you take the longer northern route that is kinder to the oxen, or the shorter path through rocky ground that carries a fair chance of breaking a wheel? Votes are taken, opinions are offered, and somehow every discussion becomes personal. You never imagined there could be so many different ways to argue about the direction of north. Some trust compasses, some trust the sun, and one man insists on following the behavior of squirrels. After his last shortcut produced a 6-hour detour and an argument loud enough to frighten the wildlife, you silently promise yourself never to listen to the squirrel man again. Wagon spacing becomes its own quiet crisis. Too close, and wheels can lock together in disaster. Too far, and a wagon can vanish into the grassy emptiness and become hopelessly lost. So the company stays near, each wagon following the one ahead, while trying not to notice how some loads are held in place with little more than string and hope. You are all bound together whether you like it or not. Roles begin to form. The wagon master becomes more counselor than commander. A scout, a thin man with the eyes of a hawk and the social grace of a raccoon, rides ahead to search for water, trail markers, and trouble. He speaks only when the news is bad, usually in short phrases such as, "That bridge is a lie," or "We may have to eat the mule." You find yourself pulled into the daily work more than you expected. A broken wheel needs repair, and suddenly you are a carpenter. A child wanders after a butterfly, and you become a tracker. Someone needs extra lard for the evening beans, and somehow you are the person who has it. Cooperation is no longer optional. Neither is gossip. Who is arguing with whom? Who is hiding sugar? Who brought more whiskey than they admitted? Every campfire brings fresh, soft drama. It is as though the entire company has become a long-running story of its own. Sometimes the tension sharpens. A poor decision by the wagon master, a muddy shortcut that costs days. Wears patience thin. Quiet talk of forming a new group or choosing a new leader begins to circulate. You find yourself drawn into low conversations, small factions gathering around personalities rather than reason. You side with the group least likely to raise its voice before morning coffee. Questions of fairness grow larger than they should. Who decides when to stop for rest? Who leads when the trail narrows? How long the noon halt should last? These sound minor until blisters, heat, and dust have filled every crease of skin. You watch grown adults argue for 20 minutes over whether the wagons should circle or keep moving while the oxen fall asleep where they stand. One day a harder choice appears. A man's axle has broken and he has no spare. It is still early on the trail, and most families guard their extra parts like treasure. He begs. His wife weeps. The children stand dust-covered and silent. The wagon master explains that if anyone gives up an axle, the entire company must wait a full day for repairs. A man from Kentucky offers his spare. Immediately, someone else objects that the delay will cost everyone. Voices rise. In the end, the vote is split, and the wagon master breaks the tie. The company waits. For a little while, a sense of unity returns. You spend the day helping mend the broken wagon. Others gather wood, check the oxen's feet, and share food. It is strange how close you can feel to people after only a week of eating the same dust. That evening there is more laughter than you have heard since leaving Missouri. A girl braids your daughter's hair. A young man tries to play a harmonica, though he knows only one tune, and keeps beginning it over. For a short time, everything feels almost gentle. Real wagon trains often traveled under written rules, some complete with small fines for breaking them. One company fined a man $2 for swearing in front of children. Some groups elected unofficial judges, usually older men with stern faces and no legal training, who settled disputes, once even ruling on the theft of a pie. Historians still discuss whether these moving companies created small democratic societies or simply managed to keep chaos from swallowing them entirely. Some see early versions of frontier towns with evolving customs and quiet elections. Others see something closer to a long, dusty struggle held together by shared need and salted pork. That night you lie awake thinking of the people traveling beside you. Strangers who have become companions, rivals who have become necessary allies. You wonder who will still be walking when the trail ends, and quietly you wonder whether you yourself will be among them. There comes a moment, usually near the 10th day, when you look into the wagon and understand that you have placed your entire life inside a wooden box the size of a garden shed and dragged it into the wilderness as though the decision were rational. You stand in the heat, sweat soaking your collar, and wonder why you believed 4 cast-iron pans, a rocking chair, and your uncle's taxidermy duck were necessary. The load is no longer merely clutter. It is weight that slows the oxen and threatens the wheels, and weight must be reduced. At first, everyone is protective of their belongings. There is a strange pride in how neatly things were packed, as though the company were competing in some frontier contest of arrangement. But on a scorching afternoon, when the trail turns more sand than soil, and the oxen look at you with clear resentment, something shifts. Every extra pound becomes another minute of suffering, another reason the wheel makes that soft splintering sound no one wants to hear. The great shedding begins. It starts with easy choices, a broken stool, a cracked bucket. Soon, the decisions grow harder. A woman you have barely spoken to weeps as she sets her china teacups on the prairie grass. A man argues with his teenage son before finally throwing a family portrait into the dust. You try to treat each choice as pure practicality, yet grief clings to every object left behind. These things were not only cargo, they were the last soft threads connecting you to the life you abandoned in Missouri. Your own sacrifices are quieter. The stove you insisted upon is rolled down a small hill and left beside a dignified pile of rejected bedposts. You keep the skillet, the coffee grinder, and your one true luxury, a slightly water-stained copy of Gulliver's Travels. It weighs little, and some nights the pages keep you from shouting at the empty sky. Food and the tools of survival now take absolute priority. Everyone begins counting and recounting their stores of flour, salt, coffee, and sugar. If you have it, you measure it twice. If you lack it, you begin watching neighboring wagons with careful eyes. The flour barrels are shrinking faster than planned. Someone discovers their bacon has turned. The smell is immediate and offensive. You help bury it, feeling both sympathy and a quiet envy that they had possessed enough bacon to spoil in the first place. You learn a new unit of measure: space. Every inch matters. The small corner behind a wheel hub becomes perfect for rope. The hollow beneath the tool chest holds dried beans. Children are tucked between sacks of rice and crates of canned fruit. No one is comfortable. No one is clean. You are simply human cargo being moved daily across an unforgiving landscape. The wagon itself becomes an adversary. Wood warps in the heat. Wheels wobble no matter how often the spokes are tightened. Your spouse spends hours covered in axle grease, muttering while forcing the structure to hold together with little more than will. You joke about building a new wagon from all the discarded parts along the trail. Someone laughs, then considers the idea seriously. Resourcefulness and mild madness have become difficult to separate. Midweek, you cross a stretch of prairie so flat and wide it feels like the edge of the known world. The trail is marked only by the faded remains of broken furniture, spilled nails, and the occasional doll's head staring blankly at the sky. You pass a chair with one leg, a single boot, a Bible whose pages flutter like small white flags. It is a ghostly parade of abandoned dreams, and it reminds you that nearly everyone ahead of you has already performed the same painful sorting of what could be kept and what must be left. Conversations at night have changed. Less is said about the future and more about the practical present. How many sacks of flour remain? Who is skilled at mending boots? Has anyone discovered a way to patch canvas that does not tear again within a day? Someone shares the tip of soaking dried beans overnight in river water so they cook faster. An older, sharper voice growls that you are all fools for not bringing hardtack. Bugs will not eat it, and neither will we, yet choose it anyway. Most wagons carried between 600 and 1,000 pounds of flour alone, along with bacon, lard, beans, rice, and a surprising quantity of coffee. Every family brought what they believed would last 6 months, forgetting that survival also required dragging all of it across mountains and rivers without roads or spare common sense. One woman brought a grandfather clock, certain it would help maintain order. It lasted 5 days before toppling and shattering. She turned the clock face into a lid for her skillet. Frontier innovation takes many forms. Historians still discuss whether the classic covered wagon, the prairie schooner, was ever truly meant for riding. Some argue the discomfort and danger made walking the only sensible choice. Others claim families regularly rotated the elderly and the young into the wagon for rest. What is certain is that you yourself are walking, day after day, because human legs have proven more reliable than hand-built wheels. That evening, you take stock beside the fire. You have lost several possessions to the trail, yet you have gained a colder eye. Every object is now judged by whether it earns its place. Sentimentality has no value when your back is raw and the oxen are trembling with fatigue. You sit chewing dry jerky that tastes of leather and mild regret, while a neighboring wagon burns a broken bed frame. The flames crackle like quiet applause. Someone passes a jug of something vaguely alcoholic. You take a sip, cough hard, and feel your muscles loosen for the first time in days. You think of the old house, the chair by the window, the dishes left behind. You miss it all, and none of it at the same moment. What you have truly left behind, you are beginning to understand, is comfort itself. There is no returning to it. You are not certain when the deeper dread arrives, but it settles one morning while you crouch behind a bush with a shovel in one hand and an unsettling complaint in your gut. There are no privies on the Oregon Trail, only open prairie, a thin hope of privacy, and the prayer that the wind will not shift. You dig quickly, finish even more quickly, and return to the company. Welcome to the daily reality of westward travel, where the most ordinary human functions become matters of public health, and where dysentery is no longer a distant joke from an old computer game, but a living, twisting misery that moves through camp like an invisible weather system, stripping away both dignity and water in equal measure. It is not alone. Cholera, typhoid, scurvy, and something the wagon master calls only plains fever travel with the company. People sweat, vomit, and collapse in ways that no amount of herbal tea can repair. The root of the trouble is hygiene, or rather its almost complete absence. Soap is precious, and usually reserved for clothing that still emerges looking as though it was washed in sorrow. Bathing happens only when the weather is perfect, the river deep enough, and courage sufficient to expose skin to mosquitoes and the judgment of squirrels. Clothing is worn until it nearly walks away on its own. By the third week, the smell of your own boots could be bottled and sold as a weapon. You do what you can. Hands are wiped with rags soaked in vinegar. Dishes are scoured with sand and hope. Yet there is only so much possible when 20 people share the same ladle, and the nearest clean water lies downstream from where the oxen drink, bathe, and relieve themselves. You begin a quiet mental game. Is this sickness from the beans, the water, or simply the growing awareness that the decision to come was a profound error? Illness moves swiftly. A child begins coughing on Monday. By Wednesday, half the caravan walks like the newly risen dead. You watch a woman boiling rags for compresses while murmuring about garlic poultices. Someone else suggests bleeding the sick to balance the humors. You nod politely and quietly hide every sharp object. There is no doctor among you, only the rumor of one farther along near Fort Laramie. You pray the company reaches it. One evening the camp is too quiet. A man named Harris, older and fond of claiming he was too stubborn to die, has not moved from his bedroll in hours. His wife stands over him fanning with her bonnet, while others gather at a respectful distance, pretending not to stare. You glimpse his face, pale, sweating, drawn tight like cloth left too long in the sun. No one speaks the word, yet everyone is thinking it. Cholera. The quiet death sentence. Cholera was the leading killer on the Oregon Trail, responsible for an estimated 10,000 deaths. 10,000 people who set out for a better life and never passed Nebraska. It traveled through contaminated water and poor sanitation and could finish a life in a matter of hours. A person might lie down with a mild stomachache and be buried before the next sunrise. Some tried to ward it off with garlic necklaces, the burning of animal dung, or silver coins placed in drinking barrels. One woman kept a potato in her pocket to draw out fever. It worked exactly as well as you would expect. Germ theory was not yet widely accepted, so many blamed bad air, unlucky stars, or moral failing. Journals speak of wagons moved to avoid sick winds, and of the dead buried facing away from camp so their spirits would not return. It was not science, but when desperation is high, superstition can feel like a kind of comfort. Harris dies just before dawn. His wife does not cry. She simply folds his blanket, tucks it beneath his chin, and sits until someone arrives with a shovel. They bury him on a small rise overlooking the trail, pile stones to keep the animals away, and carve his name into a piece of oak. A few words are spoken. Most keep their heads down, focused on not being next. You help dig, because everyone helps. The soil is dry and packed hard, resisting every stroke. As sweat runs into your eyes, you wonder how many more graves you will dig before the journey ends. Probably too many. The thought follows you even after the sun rises and the wagons begin to move again. From that day, the trail looks different. Not merely a road to Oregon, but a long corridor of loss. Every few miles another grave appears, sometimes marked, sometimes only a disturbed patch of earth. You pass makeshift headstones with names already fading, small crosses of willow, even one coffin wedged awkwardly between boulders. You learn to recognize the signs. A group walking more slowly than usual, someone missing from the evening circle, a bundle of clothes left behind without ceremony. At night, when the fire burns low and the stars feel too close, you find yourself listening for coughs in the dark, counting them the way one counts sheep. 1, 2, 3, silence. Then a deep cough from across the camp and you exhale, relieved it is not someone from your own wagon. Not yet. You begin boiling every drop of water. You scour every dish twice. You even dig a crude latrine away from camp and try to persuade others to use it. Most do. A few roll their eyes and go wherever the need takes them. You judge them quietly. There is little pride left on the trail, but there is a desperate hierarchy of cleanliness, and you are climbing it as best you can. That night, you manage to rinse your face with cold stream water and sit by the fire feeling almost human. You hold your journal and write down every small detail, not because anyone else will care, but because you want to remember the pain, the fear, and the strange pockets of peace that appear between disasters. The way the stars look when the world feels as though it is ending. The way your hands tremble just before sunrise knowing the next day could be worse. Yet strangely you also feel stronger, more focused. Survival out here is not about bravery. It is about carefulness, watching what you eat, where you walk, whom you trust, and how clean you keep the shovel. You fall asleep with one hand on your water pouch and a thin whisper of hope that tomorrow the company will still be intact. You wake to the sound of hoofbeats and rising panic, not yet your own, but the urgent low voices of neighbors and the unmistakable clatter of oxen running where they should not be. You scramble from beneath the wagon, still tangled in your blanket, heart striking an irregular rhythm. In the pre-dawn blue, you see the dark shapes of animals bolting across the open plain, and hear someone shout that the oxen are spooked. You do not know what set them off, only that you are now sprinting after two half-ton beasts in boots only half-tied, breath fogging in the cold air. Welcome to the wilder face of the trail. The West is not a gentle backdrop of purple mountains and soft meadows. It is raw and untamed, and every bit as capable of ending a life as disease or spoiled food. That peaceful sunrise may arrive with wolves. That quiet stream may hide leeches or something hungrier still. You catch one of your oxen near a cluster of low trees, eyes wide and body trembling. The other wanders in a daze, tail twitching, ribs working like bellows. Someone says a coyote, or perhaps a mountain lion. You see only a thin line of paw prints and the sharp smell of fear clinging to the animals. You soothe them as best you can, rubbing their flanks, murmuring nonsense until they calm enough to be re-yoked. The morning has been stolen. The caravan will leave late again. As the day continues, the wilderness shows more of itself. First, the buffalo, massive herds visible in the distance, their shaggy brown shapes moving like a single living sea across the plains. The sight is stunning, until one animal veers too close. Everyone freezes. Children are silenced. Rifles appear as if conjured. You hold your breath. The buffalo snorts once, turns, and disappears back into the herd. Crisis averted for the moment. Not everything is majestic. You come upon a carcass, fresh and not human. A deer perhaps, ribs exposed, stomach half-eaten, flies forming a dark halo. The bite marks are clean. Something out here has teeth and is not interested in jerky. That night the wagons are drawn closer, rifles loaded and kept within reach. You sleep with yours like a second blanket. Buffalo were both blessing and danger. Their meat was prized, yet a stampede could destroy an entire train. One recorded night a herd ran straight through a camp, smashing wagons and scattering supplies for miles. Some families slept with pigs or goats inside the wagons for warmth and as living alarms. There are accounts of goats bleating wildly at approaching danger, and of one pig named Winston that reportedly growled when wolves came near. Scholars still discuss how dangerous the wildlife truly was. Diaries often enlarge curious coyotes into monsters, yet bones do not lie. Attacks happened, especially in more isolated country. Sometimes the greater loss was not the attack itself, but what the animals carried away in the night. Food, shoes, even a small child. You begin taking greater care. Food is hung from branches or buried in caches. Livestock is hobbled and watched. Children are told repeatedly not to wander, though one small boy continues chasing birds as though on a personal mission. You carry the rifle more openly even while walking. It is not for appearance, it is for readiness. Midway through the week, the company comes upon something strange. A neat circle of bones, too orderly to be natural. A small bundle of fur at the center. No wagon ruts nearby. The group stands in silence. A few murmur about rituals. One man crosses himself. Another laughs too loudly and suggests it is only the work of local children. No one disturbs the bones. You leave them as they are. That night you camp near a thicket hoping the dense brush will offer some protection. The trees bring their own concerns. Bears, snakes, and the claim by one member of the party that a cougar has been seen slipping through the shadows. You believe it, not because you saw the animal, but because nothing feels impossible any longer. The land does not care about your plans, your careful packing, or the prayers spoken back in independence. Out here, you are simply meat wrapped in canvas. Still you adapt. You learn to read tracks, small impressions in mud, tufts of fur, broken branches. You recognize the warning calls of birds and the sound of something large moving through grass. Silence is no longer peaceful. It is the moment before something leaps. A short, sharp scream cuts the night and ends as quickly as it began. Everyone is instantly awake. Rifles are seized. You stumble from your blanket, heart drumming. The cry came from the smaller wagon of the elderly couple from Illinois. You reach them to find the woman pale and shaking, pointing toward the edge of camp. "It took our goat," she whispers. Her husband tries to comfort her, though his own voice trembles. You look where she points and see only a dark shape moving away into the distance. The next day the company is quieter. No jokes at breakfast, no fiddle, only grim, focused motion. You repair a broken wheel in silence, the creak of wood and the click of metal loud in the still air. Everyone feels the wilderness breathing around you, hungry and watchful. Yet you keep moving, because the only way out is through. You had imagined the Oregon Trail as one long continuous advance, a steady rhythm of wheels and boots falling into step with the horizon, day after day of forward motion. No one warned you that nearly as much time would be spent standing still. The hard truth arrives sometime in the second week, as you sit beside the trail for the third hour in succession, swatting flies and watching another family's wheel being mended with a level of drama usually reserved for the battlefield. Welcome to the hurry-up-and-wait portion of the journey. You rise at dawn ready to move, muscles sore but spirit still intact, only to discover that someone's oxen have wandered, a wheel has shattered, or a person has stepped on a nail and is now rolling in pain. Sometimes the delay is a sudden debate over which fork to take. Other times it is simple exhaustion. The wagons are hitched, the company is lined and ready, and then you sit and sit and sit, while the only movement is the quiet scream inside your own skull. You try to be patient. Trail time stretches like warm taffy. There is no clock, only the position of the sun and the growing certainty that the day will never end. You watch a man spend 3/4 of an hour untangling a rope from his own axle. A child throws a tantrum worthy of awards. Someone's cow wanders off again, lowing into the emptiness, and its owners give chase as though the animal owes them money. Standing still on the trail is uniquely exhausting. When you are moving, there is at least the illusion of progress. When you are stopped, the landscape closes in. It is flat, hot, and filled with flies the size of bottle caps. The prairie wind lifts a fine grit that finds every opening: eyes, teeth, clothing. The sun is a bully, and any shade is already claimed by someone sleeping under a wagon. These slow hours are when you see your companions most clearly. They lounge on wagon tongues like lizards, faces slack with boredom. Some tinker endlessly with tools. Others write in journals or mend socks with grim determination. A few manage to sleep in positions that defy anatomy. You envy them. One man passes the time carving a spoon. Another teaches his toddler to whistle. You try to read a few pages of Gulliver's Travels, but the heat and distraction blur the words. Eventually, you simply stare into the distance, trying to remember the shape of a proper tree. You have not seen one in days. Occasionally, You overhear fragments of philosophy from those as bored as yourself. Perhaps we are not meant to reach Oregon, someone mutters. Perhaps the journey is the destination. You feel a brief, uncharitable urge to strike them. By midday, the company is finally moving again, only for an ox to develop what is politely called a trail limp. You have now learned the terms hoof rot, spavin, founder, and a dozen other ailments that can stop an animal and therefore stop an entire life. The true strength of the journey belongs to the livestock, and they are as weary of it as you are. Another wagon loses a wheel with a dramatic crack. You help with the repair because delay for one is delay for all. You lift while others wedge stones and hammer makeshift pegs. The patch will hold for another 10 miles. Perhaps the average wagon wheel lasted 200 to 300 miles under ideal conditions, which you never encounter. Spare wheels were lashed to the sides of many wagons like spare tires on a very long and poorly maintained road. Some companies formed unofficial waiting groups that passed the hours with music, stories, or the carving of initials into nearby rock. One man built a crude checkerboard into the side of his wagon, using flattened bullets as pieces. Whether this was pure boredom or a deep need to win something, anything, on the trail remains unclear. Historians still argue whether the constant delays resulted from poor planning or were simply unavoidable given the nature of the land. Some claim most parties left too early, loaded too heavily, and trusted untested equipment. Others counter that even the best prepared companies fell victim to weather, sick animals, and human frailty. No one fully agrees, yet everyone spent time waiting. Your own caravan settles into a rhythm of 3 hours of slow progress, followed by 2 of complete stillness, a clumsy dance with the trail. You begin to predict the moments when motion will cease. A low hill where half the wagons will stall, a muddy dip where someone will lose a boot or an ox, a river in the distance that means coffee, and a long wait while a raft is built. These pauses become small, temporary worlds. One stop turns into a baking party as everyone attempts some form of bread over open fire. Another day, the children race barefoot across the prairie, yelling like tiny storms. You cheer them half-heartedly while holding a pot of beans. There are darker still moments as well. The times when illness forces a full stop and every smile becomes brittle, or when a wagon must be abandoned entirely, its owners transferring what they can to others with wide, quiet eyes. One man buries a chest of tools beneath a boulder and swears he will return for it. You know he will not. That night, the company does not even attempt to move the next morning. Too many problems. Oxen too tired. Children too sick. Tempers too thin. Someone shouts about poor leadership. Someone else mutters about mutiny. You sit quietly stirring the beans and wonder whether those who come after will remember this as courage or as collective madness. You fall asleep watching the stars and calculating how far you have come. Not far enough. Not nearly far enough. But tomorrow, perhaps, the wheels will turn again. There is a particular sound that tightens the stomach on the Oregon Trail. It is not the distant cry of a coyote or the wet cough of a sick child. It is the sharp crack of wood giving way, a wagon tongue, a wheel rim, a spoke. When you hear it, you freeze mid-step, already calculating how long the new problem will hold the company. This time, the sound belongs to your own wagon. Of course it does. You hurry around the side and find a hub cracked clean through. The oxen, now unhitched, stamp and roll their eyes, agitated by the sudden jolt. One of them gives you a look that clearly says it predicted this exact outcome, which is impressive for an animal that communicates mostly through drool. Everyone speaks of the trail as a noble test of the human spirit. In truth, it simply breaks things: wheels, wagons, harnesses, and patience, the same way water slowly wears stone. It does not happen all at once. It chips away one jolt, one delay, one snapped axle at a time. You gather your dwindling repair kit and examine the damage. You have done this before, once for a cousin's wagon, twice for a neighbor's, yet it never grows easier. Wood swells in the heat. Iron bands rust and warp. There is never quite enough tar. You brace the broken section with a splintered board and rope, hammering and tying, while around you the trail continues its indifferent progress. That is the true cruelty. There is no pause button. While you kneel in the dirt with a cracked wheel and a rising sense of doom, the wind keeps blowing, the sun keeps climbing, and the rest of the caravan slowly pulls ahead. They will wait an hour, perhaps two. Eventually, someone will return and say gently that the company can wait no longer. If you are not ready, you are left behind. This time you are fortunate. A younger couple from the next wagon helps lift the frame while you slide the brace into place. You strain together, sweat pouring into your eyes, until the wheel is secured, more or less. It will hold for another 10 miles. Probably. Later that day, walking beside the wagon to test the repair, you pass another family's disaster. A full axle shattered, the wagon leaning heavily to one side. The family sits in silence. The father stares at the damage as though pure concentration might mend it. The mother rocks a baby. The older son digs a shallow hole for whatever cannot be carried. You have seen this ritual before. When a wagon is beyond repair, the family either finds space in another or turns back, assuming they still possess enough supplies and strength for the return. Few do. Most simply leave things behind. The chest of linens, the iron stove dropped with a dull thud, and keep walking. You nod solemnly as you pass, and keep your eyes on the trail ahead. Nearly 1 in 10 wagons broke beyond repair on the journey, and many families lacked the skill or the spare parts to fix them. There were no stores out here, only what you carried and what you could scavenge. If a wheel cracked and you had no spare spokes, you were stopped, sometimes permanently. People grew inventive. One man replaced a shattered wheel with a thick slice of cottonwood carved into a rough circle. It worked until the next deep rut split it in two. Another group used bedposts to brace a broken axle, binding them with strips of rawhide. Desperation makes surprisingly effective engineers. Scholars continue to debate whether the wagons commonly used were ever truly suited to the task. The standard prairie schooner was light, yet it was never designed for 2,000 miles of constant punishment. Some historians argue the vehicles were underbuilt and structurally fragile. Others maintain that the pioneers did the best they could with what they had, and that the journey was always a gamble, regardless of construction. Back in camp that night, your wagon creaks ominously as you settle beside it. You lie awake staring at the wooden frame above you and wondering which piece will fail next. You know the repaired wheel is only temporary. You know the canvas has a growing tear. You know one of the oxen has begun to favor a leg. Another crisis is already on its way. You are not alone in the quiet dread. Around the fire, the talk has turned almost entirely to repairs. Who still has spare grease? Who has a few extra nails? Did anyone actually bring real carpentry skill, or is everyone simply improvising as you are? The answers are usually no, yes, and almost certainly the last. The strange mercy is that the shared misery creates its own bond. No matter how carefully prepared or how prosperous someone was back in Missouri, out here they are only another exhausted amateur mechanic pounding wooden pegs and hoping the structure holds until dark. You trade small tricks. Someone swears by soaking rope in bacon grease to make it last longer. Another person curses that advice the next day when the rope slips. One woman reveals she has been using strips of an old corset to lash down cargo. Tough, flexible, and already full of broken expectations. You admire the ingenuity and make a private note to sacrifice your own undergarments if the need becomes desperate enough. You fall asleep with the image of the wheels burned into your mind. You dream of spokes snapping like dry bones, and of the wagon collapsing into a pile of flour sacks and splinters. You wake with the sun in your eyes and the familiar stiffness in your back. Then you hear it again, the soft, warning creak. The wheel is speaking. You sigh, rise, and prepare to mend it once more. You can name the exact moment the trail diet begins to collapse. It is around the third week when you open a flour sack and find it alive with tiny black insects. You stare at the moving mass in numb silence, then shake the sack hard, as though violence might solve the problem. It does not. You pick out as many as you can, mutter a few quiet curses, and cook with the rest anyway. On the trail, the line between edible and repulsive grows thinner than the soup you are about to prepare. Food is not pleasure, it is fuel. You eat so that you can continue walking. You chew because the alternative is dizziness, weakness, and worse. The early days still held some variety. Salt pork, beans, hardtack, rice, dried apples. You even remember a single piece of pie before the last of the preserves was dropped while chasing a goose out of a wagon. Now the menu has narrowed to beans, flour, and whatever small creature no one examines too closely. Every family rationed carefully at the beginning, counting spoonfuls as though they were gold. 2 scoops of rice, a pinch of salt, just enough lard to bind the mixture into a sad ball. But rationing works only while everyone remains healthy, and on the trail health is temporary. The sick need broth, children need something extra. More food disappears than planned, and the 6-month supply that seemed generous back in independence now looks dangerously light. You begin foraging when the chance appears. Wild onions, bitter greens, the occasional bush of berries. Sometimes mushrooms are found, and someone from another wagon declares them safe. You boil them into the stew and wait to see who collapses. No one does. That night feels like a small victory. Most days, however, you eat the same thing. Flour and water fried on a skillet until it vaguely resembles a tortilla, then dipped into bean liquid. If you are fortunate, there is a shred of dried meat for texture. If not, imagination must serve. One afternoon, a group of children catches a rabbit. They parade it through camp as though they have taken down a buffalo, holding it high by the ears. You help clean it, grateful for any fresh meat, even something barely larger than a boot. That night, everyone receives a spoonful of rabbit stew, and for a few minutes, it almost tastes like home. Then the rationing tightens further. You are walking longer hours and burning more energy, while the stores continue to shrink. You see it in the careful way people chew, savoring every bite, and in the way eyes linger on neighboring plates, not with greed, but with simple longing. The children are growing thinner. You are growing shorter of temper. Hunger settles into the bones and makes itself at home. On average, a pioneer needed 2,000 to 3,000 calories each day simply to match the physical demand of the trail. Most received far less, especially as the journey wore on and supplies dwindled. Malnutrition was common. Scurvy, born of the lack of vitamin C, softened gums, loosened teeth, and turned joints into sources of constant pain. Some of the desperate boiled their own leather shoes for broth. The leather had usually been tanned with animal fat and chemicals, making it technically edible if one ignored flavor, texture, and dignity. One traveler claimed that stewing old saddle straps with wild garlic produced a taste like pure regret. Yet he lived to record the experiment. Scholars still debate how well most families prepared. Journals show wide variation. Some were meticulous, measuring every sack of flour, beans, bacon, and dried fruit. Others arrived with candy, brandy, and not a single potato. Some argue that the printed guidebooks of the day misled travelers by emphasizing comfort foods over practical ones. Others blame simple optimism, the belief that restocking would be easy along the way. It was not. When word spreads that Fort Kearny lies only a day ahead, the entire company feels a lift. You allow yourself to imagine fresh bread, perhaps even butter. You try not to think too hard about bacon. The longing hurts. As you draw closer, the warnings begin. Prices are high. Stocks are low. Expect little. The warnings prove accurate. The fort is half empty and fully expensive. Flour costs double. The salted meat is stringy and smells wrong. Still you buy what you can, because the alternative is continued hunger. One man sells his boots for a barrel of molasses. Another trades a rifle for coffee beans. You exchange a cracked mirror and 3 spools of thread for half a ham that smells only mildly of feet. That night you fry it over a smoky fire and persuade yourself it is delicious. Some things cannot be purchased. You dream of eggs, of real bread instead of the dense pan-fried bricks you have been forcing down, of peaches in syrup, of mashed potatoes, of cake. You wake chewing air. Once, in a low moment, you lick a spoon, simply to recall the taste of lard. It is not a memory you share. Yet even in the scarcity, there is a strange fellowship. Food becomes a shared obsession. When someone finds a patch of wild mint, the entire company descends upon it. A child discovers a few berries, and a line forms, as though at a great feast. You cook together, share whatever scraps remain, and trade recipes that are more longing than instruction. Someday, someone says, I will bake a real pie with butter and sugar. Everyone sighs as though remembering a lost love. Then one morning a wagon tips while crossing a ridge, and a barrel of flour bursts open, spilling down the slope in a tragic white avalanche. The company stands frozen. A grown man drops to his knees and tries to scoop the flour back into a bucket with his bare hands. No one laughs. You help him because out here, flour is more precious than gold. That night you eat slowly, chewing each bite as though it owes you something. You stare into the fire, stomach still hollow, and wonder how long the company can continue. Yet when someone passes you a thin sliver of dried apple, you smile, because it is sweet, because you did not expect it, and because tomorrow you will walk again, eat whatever remains, and continue to hope that the next mouthful will be better. You hear the river before you see it, a low, rhythmic roar like distant thunder held inside a box. The wagons slow. Even the oxen seem to pause. You follow the sound to its source, cresting a gentle rise, and there it is, a wide, slow-moving river, cutting through the earth like a lazy blue vein. It does not look especially dangerous. In the afternoon light, it almost appears inviting. You allow yourself a moment of hope that this crossing will be simple. It will not be. River crossings are among the sternest tests of both will and wagon. This one, the Platte, or perhaps the Loop, depending on whom you ask, is just wide enough to be troublesome and just deep enough to be frightening. The first difficulty is learning the true depth. A few men wade in with trousers rolled, probing the bottom with sticks as though the water might bite. One steps too far and slips. When he staggers out coughing and soaked, the company groans in unison. "We will have to float it," someone says. No one wishes to float it. Floating means sealing everything inside the wagon, wrapping the canvas tight, and trusting that your home on wheels will not become a waterlogged coffin. It means unloading anything precious, clothing, food, people, and ferrying them across by hand or makeshift raft, one precarious trip at a time. It also means praying the oxen do not panic halfway and drag everything under. The second difficulty is that floating is a generous description. These are not boats. They are wagons with gaps between the planks and iron parts already rusting. You watched one go under only last week, lost to an unexpected current and poor preparation. The family swam to safety. Their bedding did not. You begin the work of waterproofing. Tar is smeared along every seam. Barrels are lashed tight inside. Oilskin is wrapped around the food. The heaviest items, the stove, the tools, the extra flour, are pulled out and dragged around the bank. Then you turn to the oxen. They will have to swim. Ropes are tied to their yokes, and you hope they are feeling brave. When your turn arrives, your stomach drops. The current looks faster now, though you know it is only fear. You wade in with the animals first, gripping the lead rope. The cold climbs from knees to waist, and the river suddenly feels far less charming. The oxen snort and hesitate. You pull gently, whispering encouragement that is half nonsense. Somehow you reach the far side, soaked and shaking but alive. Then comes the wagon. You and two others ease it into the water, hearts hammering. It begins to float, bobbing awkwardly, swaying, as though drunk. The oxen swim. The current pulls. A wheel catches on a submerged rock, and the entire structure tilts hard. You shout. Someone throws a rope. For one terrible second, you believe everything is lost. Then the wagon rights itself with a violent lurch and drifts forward. You haul it onto the bank and collapse beside it, every muscle screaming. Your hands are blistered from the rope. Your boots are full of river silt, but the wagon is intact. The flour is dry, and no one has drowned. River crossings were among the deadliest parts of the Oregon Trail. Drowning ranked second only to disease as a cause of death. Some rivers stretched hundreds of feet across, with currents strong enough to sweep away anything not firmly controlled. Without bridges, every crossing was a gamble. Even experienced travelers lost wagons, livestock, and sometimes entire families to sudden accidents. A few pioneers carried inflatable hides or bull boats, frames of willow covered with buffalo skin. For these moments, they worked surprisingly well if one did not mind sitting in a stinking, hair-covered bowl while clutching a barrel of biscuits. One woman reportedly floated her wagon's contents across in a washtub twice and became something of a legend. Historians still disagree about how often companies chose to ferry wagons versus simply floating them. Some argue that most groups avoided floating whenever possible, building rafts or temporary bridges. Others note that the time and materials required for a proper raft were often too great, making the riskier option of floating the wagon the more common choice. Either way, the odds were never comforting. After the crossing, the company makes camp nearby. Everyone is too drained to continue. Fires are lit, wet clothing hung on wagon wheels, boots removed with pained sounds. The children play along the shore, throwing stones and chasing frogs as though they have not just watched several near disasters. You check the supplies. A few sacks of flour are damp at the edges but salvageable. The rifle is fine. The coffee is slightly soggy. You mourn it quietly. It could have been far worse. You pass a neighboring wagon and see a crate of shattered jars, pickled beets running down the wood in purple streaks. The woman who owned them looks close to tears. Someone tries to comfort her, but she simply walks away. That was her winter store. You say nothing and keep moving. That evening someone brings out a fiddle and a few people actually dance. It feels strange to hear laughter so soon after fear, yet perhaps that is exactly why it appears. Relief that for once the company made it through. The food tastes better than it should. Beans and dry bread go down easily, washed with river-chilled water and the odd sense of having passed a test. The trail tried to take you, and you crawled out the other side, coughing and soaked, but still standing. The next morning, you pack again. The river lies quiet behind you, as though it never intended harm. You give it one last look before climbing onto the wagon tongue. The oxen grunt, the wheels complain, the trail stretches forward, and so you continue. You have been told that the prairie looks the same day after day, a stretched wallpaper of grass and sky. After a few hundred miles of walking it, you know better. It does not stay the same. It only feels the same. The repetition works its way into the bones. Greenish-yellow grass, pale blue sky, the constant layer of dust at ankle height. Yet beneath the sameness, change is always occurring. Subtle at first. A cough that lingers too long. A child who will not eat. A man who has not risen from his bedroll in 2 days. That is when the soft whispers begin moving through the wagons. There is fever in the camp. No one knows exactly what kind. Out here, all fevers are gathered under vague names. Trail fever, plain sickness. Sometimes it is dysentery returning. Sometimes it is cholera or typhoid or the catch-all horror that simply means a person is shaking and no one can say why. Whatever this particular illness is, it is fast and brutal. 3 people are down by sunset. By the next morning, 2 more have joined them. You begin to wonder whether the river you crossed left something behind in everyone's stomach. You do what little you can. Water is boiled. Dishes are scrubbed with ash. Wet clothing is hung in the sun. A woman from another wagon suggests burning dried sage around the sick. It may help, or it may simply make the wagon smell like a fireplace. You do it anyway. Cloths are soaked in vinegar and pressed to foreheads. A little whiskey is mixed with river water and called medicine. Someone begins praying more loudly than usual. The sick groan and pour sweat. You recognize the pattern now. It begins with chills, then a fever so high the sufferer stops making sense, muttering nonsense or calling for people long dead. Then the shaking, and then, for some, the silence. You try to keep moving, keep hauling water, keep functioning. Yet the air itself feels thick with dread. Voices are quieter, patience thinner. The children play less. The campfires seem colder. No one sings. You overhear two men arguing over whether to press on or rest. One insists the trail is safer than sitting still. The other says the sick need time. A third voice snaps that the trail does not care what anyone needs. You do not vote. You are too busy carrying water and spooning broth into a wagon mate who has not stood for a day and a half. You clean a cloth in silence, watching the slow rise and fall of their chest, telling yourself they will recover. They always have, until they do not. Illnesses such as cholera and typhoid were rampant on the Oregon Trail, especially in the warmer months. Unsanitary conditions, shared water, and close living created perfect conditions for outbreak. Once begun, a fever could tear through a wagon train in days. Entire families disappeared between river crossings. Some travelers swore by prairie remedies that ranged from useless to actively dangerous. Turpentine, tobacco smoke enemas, mercury-laced blue mass pills. One widely believed treatment for fever was to bury the patient up to the neck in cool soil. If exposure did not finish them, pneumonia sometimes did. Historians are still trying to determine how many deaths went unrecorded because of hurried burials and the sheer volume of travel. Diaries offer only fragments. We lost 2 last night, buried another beside the trail. Some believe the true toll could be twice the usual estimates. Others say the disease simply left no tidy ledger. As the days crawl forward, the sick either improve or vanish. You dig 2 more graves. This time you help build a small rock mound over one, so the animals will not dig. You fashion a cross from a broken wagon spoke and twine. The woman buried there was someone's aunt. You barely spoke to her, yet the sound of her niece crying stays with you. When the fever finally eases, it does not leave relief. It leaves empty spaces where people used to sit, plates that no longer need filling. Everyone walks more slowly, as though carrying the weight of those who are gone. And perhaps they are. You feel it too, a heaviness in the chest that has nothing to do with packs or miles. Then the strange part. Life continues. A boy chases a grasshopper and laughs as though he has never heard of death. A couple becomes engaged by the fire one evening, the man offering a ring carved from bone. Someone finds a patch of wild strawberries and passes them out like treasure. You receive 3 and eat them slowly, trying to remember the taste of ordinary joy. And just like that, the caravan begins to breathe again, one careful step at a time, until a new kind of unease arrives. One of the wagons spots smoke on the horizon. Not the smoke of a wildfire, but deliberate vertical plumes rising in sequence. A few people tense at once. "Indians!" someone whispers. The word is heavy with both worry and ignorance. So far, the only indigenous people you have encountered have been curious, cautious, and largely unimpressed by your struggling caravan. You traded at a distance for jerky and moccasins, nodding without knowing the proper words. No violence, no danger, only weary strangers on their own land watching you pass through it. Yet the signal still rattles the company. Old fears rise like blisters. Men check their rifles. Women draw children closer. Someone ties a bowie knife to the side of a wagon, as though the gesture alone might discourage trouble. The wagon master urges calm, but the air remains tight. You do not know what is coming. Perhaps nothing. Perhaps only more prairie. That night the fever feels distant, yet the unease lingers. You lie in your bedroll half awake, listening to the soft creak of canvas and the low voices of your companions. Somewhere beyond the circle of wagons, the land shifts and watches. The fever took strength, but the trail continues, and so must you. After the fever breaks, the mood of the company changes. Tense, quiet, a collective holding of breath. No one says it openly, but it is clear the trail is entering different country, and not only in miles. You are moving deeper into lands you were warned about, where maps grow vague and rumor takes their place. Every hill feels as though it might be hiding something. Every distant smoke is met with silence and sideways glances. Everyone becomes a little more careful, a little more suspicious. The word Indians hangs in the air like thunder that has not yet sounded. You have already passed several small indigenous camps, distant figures on the prairie simply watching. The first time you saw them, a jolt ran through your chest, not exactly fear, but the pure shock of not knowing. You were raised on stories of ambush and arrows in the night. What you actually saw were people, families, a group sitting beneath a canvas shelter eating, two children chasing each other, one man on horseback, regarding your train with calm curiosity. No weapons drawn, no drama, only observation. Yet the old stories are louder than the evidence. That is how fear works. When the caravan approaches a cluster of teepees one afternoon, the response is mixed. Some tighten their grip on rifles. Others prepare small trade goods, cloth, buttons, beads, hoping the meeting will be like the last ones, quiet and perhaps even useful. You are somewhere near Pawnee or Oto territory now, though no one is certain where one nation's land ends and another's begins. The government drew lines on paper without asking anyone who lived there. A small group approaches, 4 men and 2 women dressed in hides and woven cloth, mounted on horses that look as though they were born from the wind itself. They are not openly armed. Or if they are, the weapons are kept subtle. Their faces are calm and unreadable. The wagon master steps forward, hat in hand, offering the universal language of trade: sugar, tobacco, salt. One of the women nods. She dismounts, reaches into a satchel, and produces dried meat and a pair of handmade moccasins. The exchange begins. No one shares a common tongue, yet gestures are enough. You offer a tin cup and receive a leather pouch. A boy from your company reaches toward one of the horses. The animal flicks an ear, but does not pull away. Soft laughter moves between the two groups. Not a flood, but a thin stream of something human. Still, not everyone is convinced. You hear muttering behind you, words like savages and ambush. The talkative man from Kentucky, who never stops speaking, mentions arrows and smallpox. You want to turn and ask him where his own moccasins came from, since they look distinctly Lakota in design, but you let the moment pass. The trail is long. Foolishness has time to wear itself out. You watch as one of the Pawnee men points westward and makes a zigzag motion with his hand. Mountains. You think he is warning you that the pass ahead is difficult. He points to your oxen and makes a tired gesture. You nod, grateful. Even without shared words, you understand the weight of the kindness. While popular stories often paint every indigenous encounter on the Oregon Trail as violent, most were peaceful and frequently helpful. Native nations regularly traded with emigrants, offering food, directions, and care for animals. In many cases, the greater aggression came from the settlers themselves. Treaties were ignored, land was taken, and retaliation eventually followed. Some pioneers recorded receiving directions from indigenous travelers who arranged rocks or bundles of sticks as trail markers. Others were guided through safe passes for small fees. One journal tells of a young boy who led an entire wagon train through a mountain pass in exchange for a bright blue shirt. Historians continue to wrestle with the old narrative of constant hostility. Some argue the fear was deliberately encouraged by newspapers and officials to justify further land seizure and military presence. Others suggest the tension was the natural result of too many people crossing territory without consent or understanding. The truth, as usual, sits somewhere in the middle. Cooperation existed. Conflict existed. The stereotypes were built mostly from anxiety and bad headlines. Back inside the wagon circle, the atmosphere remains complicated. The trade has gone smoothly, and no danger has appeared. Yet, as the Pawnee group rides away, one of them glances back with an expression you cannot quite read, something between pity and warning. That night the company eats well. The dried meat is rich and better than anything you have tasted in weeks. Conversation stays sparse. Eyes keep drifting toward the darkness beyond the wagons, as though waiting for the next difficulty. You lie awake, thinking of the woman with the leather satchel, the way she looked at your cracked wheel, your bent axle, your tired family, and still offered meat. Not because she was required to, not because she owed you anything, but because she saw the struggle and gave what she could. You do not write the moment in your journal. It feels too large, too different from the stories you were raised on. You do not yet have the words for it. The next day, the land changes again. More hills, the kind of trail that chews at oxen's hooves and leaves blood-stained ruts. One of the children rides in the wagon because her legs are covered in blisters. You notice a fresh set of tracks running beside your own, hoof prints that belong to none of the company's animals. Someone is watching. You do not feel threatened, only observed. You pass another small camp, this one empty, though clearly used only recently. Ashes still warm, feathers tied to branches, tools set neatly against a tree. The company walks quietly. No one touches anything, whether from respect or caution or both. Later, someone carves a short message into a cottonwood. No trouble here. You cannot tell whether it is meant for other emigrants or for whoever may be following. Perhaps it is simply a hope. That night, the wind moves through the wagons as though trying to speak. You pull your blanket tighter and listen. Out here, everyone is a stranger. But not every stranger is an enemy. You believe you have learned the rules of the trail. Rise early, boil the coffee, yoke the oxen, walk until your knees complain, and hope the wagon does not tip. It is a hard routine, yet at least it is predictable, until it is not. One day the sky changes without warning, not the slow approach of a polite storm, but a sudden violent shift. The wind rises from nowhere. The sky turns a bruised green. The temperature drops like a bad omen. You are caught mid-mile with nothing around but sagebrush and rising anxiety. There is no time to make a proper camp. The wind tears at the canvas as though determined to peel the wagons apart. Dust blows sideways, thick as smoke, stinging eyes and coating teeth. You shout, but your voice is lost. Someone's bonnet flies past like a small, sad ghost. A barrel of beans tips and a week's food rolls into a gully. Lightning arrives in hard white flashes that turn the prairie into a series of frozen images. You grab whatever you can reach, coat, child, skillet if you are lucky, and huddle beneath the wagon. The oxen moan and stamp, barely held. The canvas above you snaps like a sail in open sea, and for a moment you wonder whether the entire structure will simply take flight with you inside it. The rain begins, sharp, sideways needles of ice-cold water. You are soaked within minutes. Then, as abruptly as it began, the storm ends. The silence that follows is somehow worse, as though the world has forgotten to restore sound. You crawl out wet and shaking and take inventory. 2 wagons have toppled. A fire-making kit is gone. 1 ox has bolted into the grass and will not be seen again. But everyone is still alive, if only barely. The next day the company moves more slowly. The storm has wrung the energy from the caravan like water from a cloth. Conversation is sparse. One man keeps muttering about a tent pole that never stood properly even back in Missouri. You keep your eyes on the sky now, flinching at every passing cloud. If the storms are hard, the heat is harder. You reach a stretch of trail with no shade at all. Not a tree, not even a tall bush. Only prairie grass that seems to sizzle, and a wind that feels as though it blows straight from a furnace. You cannot drink enough water. Lips crack. Skin peels. The oxen pant with tongues hanging and eyes rolling. One day you find a man collapsed beside the trail, hands curled like claws, lips black with thirst. He makes a sound when you lift his head, but no words come. He does not survive the night. You bury him beside a dry creek bed. There is no cross this time, only a cairn of stones and a small circle of silence. Everyone is too tired for ceremony. Weather was one of the most underestimated dangers of the trail. Blizzards could strike in May. Heat waves could scorch entire sections in June and July. Thunderstorms often triggered flash floods in low ground. Many wagons were lost to sudden violent weather, washed away or shattered by wind before anyone could react. Some diaries mention travelers tying belongings to trees during high wind in the belief it would anchor the storm. One inventive family made anchors from flour sacks tied to the wheels. Another claimed their secret was sleeping under the wagon with iron cookware stacked on top of them, as though cast iron were nature's own security. Historians still discuss how prepared the emigrants truly were. Some argue that the little printed guidebooks sold in the East grossly understated the dangers, painting the West as a mild, sunny paradise, and omitting minor details such as tornado country or hailstones the size of walnuts. Others contend that warnings existed but were ignored or dismissed by people who believed they would be among the lucky. No one was lucky out here, only stubborn. Things do not improve. A few days after the heat, a hailstorm crashes over the train, as though auditioning for the Book of Exodus. One moment the afternoon is merely cloudy. The next, ice is falling from the sky in chunks the size of goose eggs. The sound is deafening, pinging off wagons, cracking crates, denting the tin wash basin you forgot to secure. You pull the children close and huddle again, protected by nothing more than a fraying quilt and denial. When it ends, the trail looks like a battlefield of smashed tools and shredded canvas. One of the oxen has a bleeding cut on its flank. A few people attempt jokes. At least we have ice for the lemonade. But no one truly smiles. After that, the cold creeps in. Not a full frost, but a drop in temperature that sends everyone scrambling for coats they believed they would not need until October. You learn the layering game quickly. Too few and you shiver. Too many and you sweat, which leaves you colder still when the sun drops behind the hills. The hardest part is the nights. The fire burns low and every blanket feels too thin. You press close to your family under the wagon, knees drawn up, breath fogging. If you are fortunate, someone's goat crawls in beside you, warm, strong-smelling, mildly judgmental, and undeniably helpful. One night, a woman's baby will not stop crying. She walks back and forth by the fire, murmuring and rocking. The rest of the camp pretends not to listen, not to worry, not to wonder whether the child carries the same fever that took 3 others the week before. In the morning, the crying has stopped, and so has the baby. The burial is silent. No words, only a small doll left beside a tiny grave. You find you cannot cry any longer. The wind has taken the tears, and still the trail moves forward. That is its deepest cruelty. There are no rain days, no snow days, no pause for mourning, or even proper rest. The weather comes, punishes, and departs, and you continue walking. You walk through rain, through hail, through mud that swallows boots and hope alike, because there is no other choice. 3 days later, you pass the place where the baby was buried. The grave is already disappearing into the grass. You lose track of the number of days you have been walking. It sounds like a line from a melodrama, yet it is simply the new shape of life. The sun rises, you rise, you place one foot in front of the other, and by the time the moon appears again, you have forgotten what it felt like to sit still for any length of time. What makes the monotony harder is that you are not enduring it alone. Your children walk beside you, boots too large, clothing too small, faces already older than when you left Missouri. They no longer complain much. That is the worst part. At the beginning of the trail, they were full of questions and small excitements. Everything was new. The birds, the wildflowers, the brief thrill of riding in the wagon before they discovered how uncomfortable it was. You remember your youngest collecting shiny pebbles from the road and calling them trail jewels, keeping them in a little pouch like a prospector. The pouch is empty now. She stopped picking them up weeks ago. Children on the trail walk the same distances as the adults. You had hoped they would not have to, but hope does not lighten an exhausted ox or reduce the weight of every extra pound. So they walk, small boots kicking up dust, small hands steadying themselves against the sides of wagons. They grow quieter and more serious. They understand, in a way that aches in your chest, that play has become a luxury. That is not to say they never try. When the train pauses, they still run into the tall grass after grasshoppers or attempt to catch birds with bare hands. They invent games with sticks and stones and laugh at one another's terrible imitations of the adults. Once, briefly, they manage a game of pretend school in which one bossy child teaches the others how to spell Missouri and mispronounces it every time. But the games fade. The farther you travel, the less room remains for childhood. You begin noticing the small changes: lips cracked and dry, cheeks hollowing, a boy with a splinter that has turned angry, another limping from a twisted ankle. You carry your youngest for half a mile before your back refuses. Then you simply hold her hand and tell stories while both of you keep walking, pretending your feet do not feel like broken timber. It is estimated that as many as 50,000 children made the journey west on the Oregon Trail. Many were under 10. Most walked the entire distance, some 2,000 miles, beside their families. Diaries often note how quickly the children aged, taking on chores and responsibilities far beyond their years. Some brought pets, cats, dogs, even birds in cages. One boy traveled with a pet turtle on a string. Another girl insisted on bringing a goat that ended up pulling a miniature cart behind the main wagon. These animals were often more than companions. They were comfort, distraction, warmth on cold nights, and sometimes, heartbreakingly, emergency food. Scholars still discuss the psychological cost of the journey on the young. Few first-hand accounts from children themselves survive. Most were too young to write or too busy surviving. Adult journals describe children growing increasingly quiet, obedient, or sometimes withdrawn and sharp-tempered. The loss of siblings, friends, pets, and even toys created a strange and painful inner landscape. They did not merely cross a continent. They aged decades along the way. You watch it happen inside your own family. Your middle child, once the loudest, now speaks in a near whisper. Your 9-year-old son, convinced he is the man of the house, has begun checking the oxen's hooves every morning. He is proud of the work even though you quietly redo it after he walks away. Sometimes you catch them watching the adults too closely, absorbing the worry, the calculations about rations, the soft conversations about who may not finish the journey. You try to shield them, but the trail allows no secrets. Everything is visible, baked in the sun, and carried on the wind. When someone dies, they see the burial. When a fight breaks out, they hear every word. When illness comes, they smell it. And still they endure. One day, a storm holds the caravan in place for half a day. You are stuck beneath the wagons again. Everything soaked, spirits flat. The children are cold and restless. Then, without warning, your daughter begins to hum. A soft tune. Nothing special. A lullaby from home. Another child joins. Then another. By the time the rain eases, half the children are singing in thin, reedy voices, like ghosts who have forgotten they are supposed to be sad. You do not cry, but your throat closes as though trying to remember how. The next day they are back to walking. There is no other option. Some ride for a mile or two, when a space opens in a wagon, but mostly they plod forward, dust-caked, sunburned, and heartbreakingly brave. You hear them whispering sometimes about home, about what they will do in Oregon, about the friends they left behind. One boy says he will build a house with 2 chimneys. Another swears he will open a candy shop and never charge a single penny. The dreams are small, yet they are still alive. That is something. You try to keep their minds occupied. You teach them songs. Tell them stories you half remember from books you no longer carry. Point at clouds and pretend they are shapes. Anything to keep them moving and believing that the endless trail leads somewhere worth reaching. One afternoon you find a rag doll lying in the grass beside the trail, dirty, half crushed, one button eye missing. You pick it up and carry it for miles, wondering which child lost it and whether they cried. When you pass a family with a little girl of the right age, you offer it gently. She nods without speaking, takes it as though it were made of porcelain, and holds it against her chest for the rest of the day. You say nothing more. You simply walk beside her in silence as the sun lowers behind the wagon wheels and the trail continues its long reach forward. By now you have learned that the old saying about a woman's work never being done was never a metaphor. It is a precise description of the daily schedule. Out here, the work is not only never finished, it never even pauses. From the moment the sky begins to pale behind the hills, long before the oxen are yoked and the wheels begin to turn, the women of the trail are already deep in the day's labor. And yes, that includes you. Your day begins in a rush of cold water and hotter tempers. You are up before the sun, coaxing a fire from damp twigs and whatever scraps of kindling have not already been used as makeshift wheel wedges. You mix flour and water with numb fingers and slap together another round of trail bread, a generous name for the chewy, half-burned discs your family eats without complaint, mostly because they have stopped expecting flavor. Then everything that came out of the wagon the night before must go back in. The process never grows easier. Bedding is heavy. Food barrels are awkward. Your arms are still sore from yesterday's miles. The children need shoes tied, water bottles filled, and at least one of them will attempt to wander off barefoot and shirtless if your attention drifts for more than a few seconds. Someone is already crying. You no longer ask why. When the wagons finally roll, there is still no rest. You walk alongside because every seat is occupied by the sick, by valuable supplies, or by livestock that refuses to be tied elsewhere. While the men shout at the oxen and argue over trail forks, you are already thinking about the evening meal, the water that remains, and how much firewood you might gather before dark. You have learned to recognize the good shrubs, the dry, brittle ones that burn hot and fast, and even the children know to collect buffalo chips with only minimal complaint. It is a strange life when you can judge animal dung by texture and burn quality. You expected hard work and the struggle for survival. You did not expect the sheer relentlessness. The men may guide the wagons, but it is the women who keep the entire machine from stopping. You cook, clean, sew, mend, soothe, nurse, and sometimes quietly dig graves. There is no applause and rarely any thanks, only the knowledge that if you stop, everything else stops with you. Someone's baby has a fever. You offer the last of your willow bark tea, brewed from twigs you stripped 2 days earlier, without mentioning that you had been saving it for your own daughter who has been coughing at night. It is an unspoken code. Help where you can, because no one knows who will need help tomorrow. You think of your own mother back in Missouri, who would have called this entire enterprise madness. She never walked the trail. Women played essential roles in the success or failure of every wagon train, though they were often left out of the official records. They managed the food, treated the sick, taught the children, and helped repair wagons. Some led entire families west after husbands died or disappeared. Their names are scratched into trail history, sometimes literally carved into stone with the points of sewing needles. Many brought small comforts from home: fine china, embroidered pillows, heavy iron skillets that served little practical purpose yet made the journey anyway. One woman hauled a full-length mirror across the plains. When her wagon overturned, she refused to leave the frame behind, even after the glass shattered. Historians still debate whether the trail empowered women or simply extended their domestic burdens into harsher conditions. Some argue that the demands of the journey blurred the usual roles. Women drove wagons, hunted, and made decisions when men could not. Others believe the trail merely moved the household into the wilderness and chained women to endless duty under worse circumstances. The truth is almost certainly both. In your own case, empowerment feels like a bitter joke. You are stronger than you have ever been. Hands rough, arms firm, skin hardened by sun. Yet you are exhausted in ways that sleep cannot touch. You have seen what happens when a mother collapses from heat or hunger. Everything stops, so you keep going. You smile for the children, hum while you cook, and whisper bedtime stories about the green hills of Oregon, even though you are no longer certain those hills exist. There are small good moments. You laugh with the other women while washing clothes in a muddy stream, the soap made from ashes and animal fat, leaving your hands dry as paper. You share gossip that is almost entirely invented. You trade recipes for dishes no one has the ingredients to make: apple pie, roast duck, buttered biscuits. Simply speaking the words feels like a kind of magic. One woman draws a cake in the dirt, and everyone stares at it as though it were a vision. Sometimes you tell stories while you walk. The children gather close, faces flushed and eager for anything that breaks the endless rhythm of boots on dirt. You tell them of queens and dragons, of sea voyages and cities full of light. You do not mention that you have never seen any of those things yourself. It does not matter. Out here, imagination is another form of survival. One night, a woman gives birth beside a wagon. The labor is long and hard. You boil water, tear strips of cloth, and murmur encouragement while trying not to show your own fear. The baby arrives in silence, the mother in tears. You wrap the child, place him in her arms, and return to stirring the beans. The next morning, you rise as always. You roll the bedding, brush dirt from your skirt, check the children's feet for blisters. You lift the coffee pot with hands that tremble only a little. Another day, another mile. Sometimes as you walk, you allow yourself to dream of a real bed, a house with 4 walls, a quiet afternoon, in which the loudest sound is a bird in a tree you yourself planted. Perhaps a porch, a rocking chair, no more wagons. But for now you stir the pot, sew another shirt, wipe another child's face. And when the men speak of the real work of the trail, you nod and smile and do not bother to correct them. While they conquer the miles, you are conquering everything else. You stop counting the graves after the first dozen. At the beginning, each one struck like a physical blow, a sharp reminder that someone's journey ended in that exact patch of dirt. Somewhere along the trail, the edges of mourning dull, and the sadness settles into something quieter and heavier. You still feel it, of course. The weight never truly leaves, but you learn to carry it alongside the water jug and the bundle of firewood. The graves are everywhere now. Sometimes they are marked with stones, sometimes with a wooden plank and a name carved by pocket knife. Other times there is nothing at all, only a disturbed rectangle of earth already losing its shape to the wind. You pass one every few miles. The children no longer ask who it was or what happened. They simply walk a little faster and keep their eyes down. When you help bury someone, there is always a ritual, even if it is makeshift. A few words, a hymn, if anyone remembers the verses. A moment of bowed heads. You have buried people from your own wagon, and you have helped bury strangers. Grief lands differently when you are the one holding the shovel. There is no pastor, no fine linen, no promises of a better place, only dirt and loss and the pressure to finish before the light fails. Some graves receive flowers, some receive nothing. A few are dug with care and lined with stones to discourage animals. Others are hurried, shallow, filled with equal parts earth and guilt. You have had to leave a grave unfinished because wolves were circling or thunderheads were moving too fast. Once you buried a woman with only her bonnet pulled over her face and a few lines of verse spoken between sobs. You never learned her name, and yet you remember all of them. The teenage boy with the crooked tooth who drank from a stagnant puddle, the old man who wandered into the grass and never returned, perhaps a stroke, perhaps simply too tired to continue, the mother of twins who reached only as far as Fort Kearney, the baby too small to name who was wrapped in linen and placed in a box made from crate planks. Then there was the family that had no time to dig. You came upon them a day after fever had passed through their wagon. 3 bodies lay beside the trail, wrapped in blankets. No markers, no words, only the faint smell of death, and a note pinned to a nearby tree. No tools. Keep going. You helped bury them anyway, scraping a hole with the flat of a skillet and your own hands. No one spoke during that one. At least 20,000 people are believed to have died along the Oregon Trail. Disease was the primary killer. Cholera, dysentery, typhoid, but many also died from accidents, exposure, malnutrition, or injury. Most were buried in shallow graves right beside the trail. A few were placed under the trail itself so that the wagons would drive over the resting place and hide it from animals and scavengers. Some emigrants left small sentimental objects in the graves: buttons, lockets, letters. One woman insisted her husband be buried with a silver dollar under his tongue to pay the toll at Heaven's Gate. Another placed her baby's rattle on the grave and said, "So she will not be lonely." These quiet private customs often went unrecorded, yet lingered in stories told years later. Historians still discuss how death on the trail shaped the larger pioneer identity. Some argue the high mortality was later smoothed over in favor of more heroic narratives of land claimed and destiny fulfilled. Others believe the constant movement and lack of time for proper mourning created a culture of resilience forged in shared suffering, a culture in which grief became a kind of background noise. Out here, death becomes ordinary, not acceptable, not forgotten, but accepted. You learn to notice the signs: someone walking more slowly, falling behind, eyes grown dull. You keep watch, offer water, offer silence. Sometimes they recover, sometimes they do not. There is a strange fellowship in the losses. When someone dies, everyone helps, even those you believe did not care. A man who has not spoken to you in a week will take a turn with the shovel. A woman with no spare cloth will tear her apron in half for a shroud. Grief on the trail is a communal effort. It is the only way it does not consume you entirely. And then, somehow, you move on. You hitch the oxen, pack the wagon, wipe the dirt from your face, tuck a child's hair behind an ear. You eat a few bites of whatever has not spoiled, and you walk again. Past the newest grave, past the place where someone else gave up, past all the spots where you quietly wonder whether your own bones will one day rest. The road does not stop for sorrow. You walk through it and with it. One evening, a girl from another wagon places a single prairie daisy on a grave you passed hours earlier. She had carried it tucked behind her ear all day, waiting for the right place. You do not know whose grave it was. Perhaps she did not know either. It did not matter. You do not speak of it. You only nod. That night the stars feel a little colder, and you dream of Missouri, not because you wish to return, but because you still remember what it felt like not to carry so much silence in your chest. You knew the trail would be hard. You expected hunger, exhaustion, disease, perhaps a few arguments over supplies. What you did not expect was the sheer, unrelenting chaos that people and animals bring with them. One day, everything seems more or less under control. The next, you are dodging flying hooves, separating brawling men, and chasing chickens that have decided to stage a jailbreak. The Oregon Trail is not only a path west, it is a rolling pressure cooker, filled with short tempers, long grudges, and far too much time in which to be angry. It begins with a stampede. You are half asleep, curled under your blanket with a sore back and the stars in your eyes, when the ground begins to tremble. At first it is only a slight vibration, enough to rattle the pans. Then the sound arrives. Thundering hooves, guttural lowing, the unmistakable crack of wood giving way. You are on your feet at once, heart hammering, stumbling through darkness as dark shapes blur past in panic. Someone's oxen have spooked, probably at a coyote or a raccoon or their own shadow. It does not matter. The result is 30 tons of terrified livestock charging through camp. You duck behind a wagon just in time to avoid being trampled. Another wagon is less fortunate. You hear it collapse under the force. Pots and barrels spilling everywhere, canvas flapping like a shroud. You spend the next 2 hours chasing cattle with makeshift torches, calming screaming children, and shouting yourself hoarse. When the chaos finally dies, the damage is worse than you first thought. 2 wagons broken, 1 cow injured, a dog missing, and 3 people angry enough to declare they are turning back. No one does, of course. There is nowhere else to go. The next morning the arguing begins. It turns out the stampede started because one man, Lars, the loud Swede with the fancy hat, left his oxen untied to graze at night. Someone else blames the layout of the camp. Another person accuses the fiddler, yes, there is still a fiddler, of playing devil's music too near the animals. Fists fly. One man ends up with a bloody nose and a bruised pride. You stand at a careful distance, trying not to become involved yet enjoying the spectacle a little more than you should. And the mess only grows. By now the company has been traveling together for weeks. Familiarity has replaced politeness. People snore too loudly, chew too close, borrow flour without asking. Small annoyances fester until they become open feuds. You hear the same complaints again and again. He thinks he is in charge. She never pulls her weight. They are stealing water. It is like a long, dusty episode of frontier domestic drama. One day, 2 women confront each other over a cooking fire. One claims the other's child stole her salt pork. The accused replies that the pork tasted like shoe leather anyway. Voices rise, hands fly. You have never before seen a bonnet used as a weapon, but now you have. The husbands become involved. The wagon master steps in and threatens to divide the camp. Everyone cools for a while, until supper, when someone accidentally dumps a pot of beans into the offender's fire. Conflict among wagon parties was common and often intense. Weeks or months of close proximity, constant stress, and shared hardship could fray even the most even-tempered. Disputes over leadership, livestock, chores, and space frequently escalated. Some companies broke apart entirely, continuing in smaller groups and hoping the trail would be kinder in reduced numbers. A few trains created written rules or even miniature constitutions with agreed penalties. Fines for profanity, official cooling-off periods after fights. One group famously banned singing before noon after an overly enthusiastic teenager kept waking the camp with off-key ballads. Historians disagree about what these breakdowns reveal. Some see them as proof that the wagon companies were simply society in miniature, subject to all its ordinary dysfunctions. Others argue that the ability to recover from conflict, to keep walking after a screaming match or a fist fight, demonstrates an unspoken bond among the pioneers. Survival first, feelings later. After the stampede, your own group changes, not by formal vote, but through the subtle shifts that follow shared disaster. People stay closer to their own wagons. Fewer meals are shared. Conversations grow quieter and more cautious. The fiddler does not play for several days. Even the oxen seem tense. Yet trail life does not allow anyone to sulk forever. There is too much work, wheels to mend, food to prepare, miles that still must be walked. Slowly the social walls thin again. You see one man hand another a nail when an axle begins to complain. A woman passes out boiled coffee grounds with a small wink. The fiddler starts playing once more, softly, and no one stops him. Still you keep a measure of guard up. People out here are like the animals. They startle easily, turn mean when hungry or exhausted or pushed too far. You have seen grown men weep over lost boots and grown women laugh while digging graves. The line between functioning and falling apart is thin. One moment there is cooperation. The next there is chaos. You walk through both. One evening as the sun sets red and too quiet, you hear a shot. Everyone freezes. Another shot, then silence. You run toward the sound. A man stands over a dead mule, his own. It broke a leg and could not rise. He had to end it. His hands shake. His eyes are empty. No one speaks. Another man walks up and helps drag the body out of sight. Then everyone returns to camp as though nothing occurred. That is how it works out here. Everything falls apart. Then everyone pretends it did not. That night the wind rises again. You hear someone crying softly under a wagon. Someone else is singing. Somewhere in the darkness the fiddler begins a slow tune. You fall asleep to the sound of tension retreating for the moment, knowing the trail is long and the next stampede is always closer than it appears. When someone in camp whispers that a trading post lies just over the next ridge, you do not believe them. You have been disappointed before. Promises of fresh bread, bullets, or even simple soap that led only to more empty miles. Yet the idea takes root and grows. A trading post, a fort, something resembling civilization. Even if it is only a shack with 3 moldy biscuits and a mule for sale, it sounds like salvation. The next day the ridge comes into view, and this time the rumor is true. You crest the hill and see a small cluster of buildings nestled along a bend in the river, smoke rising gently from chimneys. It is not much. 2 main structures, a few smaller huts, what might be a fenced garden. But to eyes long blinded by dust it might as well be a great city. The children cheer. A woman actually claps. The wagon master only nods grimly and mutters something about keeping expectations low. You reach the fort around noon under a high, hot sun. The smell hits first. Smoke, horses, sweat, and something that might be beans, or might simply be despair. A faded sign names the place Fort Bernard, though everyone simply calls it the place with the barrel of flour and no manners. The wagons are parked in a loose circle, the oxen tied, and you walk toward the trading house with your meager collection of barter goods held tightly. Scraps of cloth, a pocket knife, 2 buttons, and a desperate smile. Inside is chaos. Dozens of people crowd a wooden counter waving items, arguing, pleading. Behind the counter stands a man with the expression of someone who has been shouted at for 17 hours straight and has mentally left his own body. He is thin, pale, and wears a fur hat that may be more mold than animal. His assistant, who might be a brother or might be a reanimated scarecrow, shovels beans into a sack with the urgency of a drowning man. Prices are outrageous. A pound of flour costs more than you would ever have paid at home. A single candle is worth a shirt. Coffee is beyond reach. A man in line claims he traded his last pair of socks for a handful of tobacco and does not regret it. You believe him. You would trade your own boots for a cup of strong coffee and 2 quiet hours. Still, you manage a deal. You exchange a small tin mirror and a scarf for a chunk of hard cheese and half a jar of molasses. The man behind the counter looks at you as though he is making a very poor business decision. You smile sweetly and back away before he can change his mind. Outside, others are making similar trades, some for supplies, some for stories. One young man is drawn into a dice game and loses the only bar of soap his family possessed. Another woman barters for a new bonnet and walks around camp for the rest of the day as though she were royalty. You draw water from the well, cool, clean, miraculous. The children bathe in the shallows of the river with actual soap. You scrape mud from your boots, scrub your face, and sit for a few minutes doing nothing at all, simply breathing and watching. That alone feels luxurious. Trading posts and forts were vital to overland migration. Fort Kearny, Fort Laramie, and Fort Bridger served as key supply points, offering food, tools, and information about conditions ahead. Prices varied wildly. Some posts were known for fairness, others for gouging the desperate. Still, they often meant the difference between continuing and failing. Some forts sold soda biscuits made with saleratus, an early form of baking soda that left the bread with a strange flavor and sometimes a greenish tint. One traveler swore the biscuits tasted like lye soap, yet were soft enough to eat with a toothache. Another described them as both food and punishment. Historians often discuss the role of these posts as cultural crossroads. Beyond commerce, they became places where emigrants, fur trappers, missionaries, indigenous peoples, and outlaws all met. Sometimes to trade, sometimes to argue, sometimes simply to observe one another from a safe distance. Diaries describe uneasy truces, tense negotiations, and the occasional unlikely friendship formed over a shared bottle. That night, the fort becomes a brief festival ground. Fires burn higher. Meals are slightly less grim. Someone opens a bottle labeled medicinal and passes it around. The children run through the grass with faces clean for once. Even the oxen seem to relax, standing still, without being shouted at, for 5 consecutive minutes. You trade for a little news as well. Word comes from a train ahead of you. They lost 3 people to tools, but the mountain passes are clear for the moment. Another traveler shares a crude map he drew himself. It is mostly scribbles, yet it gives you the hope that you are at least not completely lost. Not everyone is comforted. A man from your company corners the trading post assistant and demands to know how many days remain until the next fort. The assistant shrugs and answers, "Depends who's sick and whose wheel breaks." The man curses and stalks away, muttering about fools and dust. Even in this short respite, the underlying tension remains. Supplies are still tight, nerves still frayed, and no matter how good the rest feels, you know you cannot stay. The next morning you rise early. You refill the water, pack the wagon, and make certain the molasses jar is safely nestled between sacks of beans. You say goodbye to the strange little cluster of buildings that gave you a pause from the endless road. You walk past the carved initials on the fort's gate, proof that you are not the first to pass through, and will not be the last. As the wagons roll out, a boy waves goodbye to one of the fort's workers, a teenage girl who nods solemnly and turns back to her chores. The boy sighs. You say nothing, but you understand. The trail does not allow long farewells, only forward motion. You glance back once more at the fort, small, stubborn, weather-beaten, and then let it fade into the dust. Ahead lies more prairie, more hunger, and a great many more miles of walking. There is a goat asleep in your bedroll. You do not know how it arrived there. You do not know who owns it, and at this point on the trail you do not especially care. It is warm. It is not biting anyone. That qualifies it as a welcome guest. You nudge it gently. It blinks at you, with the expression of a creature that believes it owns the space, then farts and trots off to chew someone's firewood. You sit up slowly, bones complaining, and realize you have begun to regard the other creatures, pets, livestock, even the occasional squirrel, as full members of the caravan, just as necessary and just as dysfunctional as the human ones. Take Pickles, for example. Pickles is the goat that joined the train near Fort Kearny. You are not certain who originally claimed him, but somewhere along the way, ownership became communal. Pickles has visited every wagon, chewed every bonnet, and attempted to headbutt every sleeping ox. He is fearless, strong-smelling, and oddly affectionate. The children adore him. The adults mostly tolerate him. Yet deep down, everyone agrees he has become the emotional support goat of the Oregon Trail. Then there is Buster the dog, half mutt, half hero. He guards the wagons at night, barks at anything remotely suspicious, which is everything, and once chased off a coyote with more courage than sense. He has taken to walking beside the lead wagon with a purposeful gait, as though on official patrol. His ears remain alert, his tail ticking like a metronome. He sleeps curled under the tongue of the lead wagon and growls at strangers as though he has seen things, which he almost certainly has. The livestock, too, have become more than cargo. You once thought of the oxen as walking engines. Now they are family. You know their individual voices. Which one likes to be scratched behind the ears? Which one pretends to limp for sympathy? You speak to them more than you speak to some of the people. After all, they listen, and they never lecture you on proper axle maintenance. Your milk cow, Lucy, is a quiet trooper. She gives less milk these days, whether from stress, dust, or simple exhaustion at being dragged across a continent. But she still produces enough to make breakfast bearable. You protect her like royalty. When she received a small cut on her leg, half the camp helped bandage it and sang soothing songs that mostly just confused her. She lowed in what you chose to interpret as approval. Many families brought livestock beyond the oxen and mules: chickens, goats, pigs, dogs, milk cows. These animals provided eggs, milk, meat, and a measure of protection. They were often treated as members of the family, given names, and even space inside the wagon during storms or extreme cold. Some pioneers kept more unusual companions: raccoons, badgers, even prairie dogs. One girl reportedly smuggled a duckling in her apron for 3 weeks, feeding it bits of hardtack until it was large enough to waddle beside the wagon. It lived in a bucket when not walking and quacked at anyone who came too close. When it was lost during a river crossing, the entire camp held a small memorial. Historians have long discussed the emotional role of animals on the trail. Were they merely practical assets, or did they become substitute friends in a harsh and isolating world? Diaries often read like letters to beloved pets, filled with worry, affection, and grief. Some scholars argue these bonds reveal a deeper truth about the journey. People survived not only through strength, but through companionship, even the kind that walks on 4 legs and smells of yesterday's beans. You watch one of the children feeding Pickles a strip of old cornbread. The goat gobbles it and tries to climb into the wagon as though he has suddenly been promoted to foreman. The child laughs until her father shoos the goat away, muttering about fleas and chewing habits, yet even he is smiling. Later you see two boys constructing a harness for their dog from spare leather and bits of broken bridle. They attach him to a tiny cart, no larger than a laundry basket, and take turns riding inside. The dog looks confused, but also rather proud. It is the closest thing to pure joy the company has felt in days. Not every animal finishes the journey. That afternoon, one of the mules simply collapses mid-stride and will not rise. The owner, a quiet man who rarely speaks, kneels beside the animal, stroking its neck and whispering things no one else can hear. The rest of the company keeps moving, not from callousness, but because there is nothing else to be done. The man stays behind with a shovel. When he rejoins the train that evening, he is silent, hands filthy, eyes unreadable. You offer him a piece of leftover molasses bread. He nods and eats it without tasting. You understand. Everyone understands. That night, Pickles curls up beside the fire, as though he owns it. A few chickens roost in the wagon, heads tucked under wings, dreaming whatever chickens dream. Lucy the cow lies nearby, chewing calmly, a large breathing emblem of persistence. Buster, ever the sentinel, lies near the oxen, with eyes half closed, but never fully at rest. You sleep more soundly, knowing they are all present. The trail has a way of stripping away comforts, habits, and illusions. Yet it also offers strange gifts. A goat that seems to know when spirits are low. A dog that barks just before a storm arrives. A cow that gives one last cup of milk even when she is exhausted. Out here, you accept love wherever it appears, even when it arrives on hooves. There is a rhythm to the trail now. It is not pleasant exactly, but it is familiar, like a tune you never chose, yet find yourself humming, because it will not leave your head. Rise before sunrise. Pack everything you unpacked the night before. Eat something that only vaguely resembles food. Hitch the oxen. Begin walking. Walk until your knees issue formal complaints. Stop. Eat again. Make camp. Repeat. This is your life. The endless prairie shuffle. The days possess a sameness that borders on the surreal. Time becomes elastic. You forget what month it is, then what week. At some point, even the days blur together like ink left in the rain. The only reliable calendar is your own body, a blister on the right heel that is almost healed, the dull ache in your lower back that has been present since you slipped over a stump. You mark the passage of time by injuries rather than dates. 15 to 20 miles a day, the wagon master said at the beginning, back when his hat was still clean and his optimism intact. Now he says little, only nods, points, and keeps walking like the rest of you. You walk past wagon ruts so deep they look like scars cut into the earth. You wonder how many others have passed this exact ground. How many footsteps, how many wheels. You try to imagine the lives left behind. The little girl who lost her doll in this patch of grass. The woman who gave birth behind that rock. The man who died of heat stroke just over that rise. Their stories are packed into the dirt now, buried under your boots. You grow skilled at walking, not fast, but steady. You learn the small tricks, how to wrap your toes in cloth to prevent blisters, how to tuck your chin so the sun does not cook the back of your neck, how to breathe through your nose when the wind lifts a dust storm. You pace yourself like an old mule, not glamorous, but effective. Meals are timed to the movement. Breakfast is whatever remains from the night before, eaten cold because lighting a fire at dawn feels like an unaffordable luxury. Lunch is a mouthful of jerky or a heel of trail bread consumed while walking, jaw working in time with your legs. Dinner, if the day has not broken you completely, is a pot of beans or something boiled into submission. The smell of burnt coffee is the only consistent seasoning. Most wagon trains aimed for 15 to 20 miles a day under ideal conditions, yet ideal conditions rarely appeared. Broken wheels, sick livestock, difficult terrain often cut the distance in half. The full journey took 4 to 6 months, longer when disaster struck, and disaster almost always struck. A few emigrants brought early mechanical pedometers to track their daily mileage. One man recorded in his diary that he walked exactly 2,102 miles before the device broke. Another woman tested how far she could walk barefoot before giving up. The answer was 12 miles. People grew strange with their endurance. Historians still discuss whether pioneers walked more than they rode, by necessity or by deliberate choice. Some argue that walking protected the animals and reduced strain on the wagons, making it a strategic decision. Others claim there was little choice. Riding inside the wagon was often miserable, jarring, and cramped. Regardless, most people walked 80 to 90% of the distance, roughly the span from New York to Salt Lake City, on foot, in inadequate shoes. By now, your boots have molded to your feet in the particular way only footwear that has seen too much can mold. You have patched them with string, rawhide, even a piece of metal someone swore would help. It did not. You have developed a peculiar affection for them, like old abused pets that continue doing their job long after they should have been retired. The children walk as well. Not the entire day, but enough. You glance over and see your son pacing out the alphabet with each step, mouthing letters in time with his feet. Your daughter hops over cracks, counting softly under her breath. They no longer whine as much. That is not necessarily a good sign. The oxen plod onward, resigned. Their hooves raise little clouds of dust that settle on everything. Skin, food, the last frayed edge of your patience. You have stopped brushing it off. You have become dust. The trail has a way of turning everyone the same shade of beige. Every so often someone sings, not loudly, just a tune under the breath. A hymn, a sea shanty, a scrap of folk nonsense. It moves through the company like smoke, picked up by a second voice, then a third, before fading as quickly as it began, as though the song itself is too shy to remain long. Your thoughts shrink. The world narrows to wagon wheels and footsteps. You find yourself thinking of small, useless things. The exact shape of a cloud. The feel of a particular pebble under your boot. Whether you will ever taste cheese again. That one ridiculous knock-knock joke your cousin told a decade ago that now loops through your mind for 6 solid hours. Sometimes you pass landmarks. Large ones such as Chimney Rock or Independence Rock, and people cheer. Others, like you, simply nod. Another stone in the desert. Another mark on an invisible progress bar. You stop seeing the landscape as scenery. It is merely more ground that must be walked across. One afternoon you pass a broken-down wagon, its axles snapped in two, the canvas ripped like a peeled banana. No one is there, only a single boot and a note carved into the wood. Gone to catch up. You never do. That evening, as the fire burns low and everyone slouches around it like a collection of battered puppets, you do the arithmetic. You have walked hundreds of miles. You will walk hundreds more. And despite the sore legs, the blister on your thumb, the constant gnawing hunger, you are still moving. That is what matters out here. Not speed, not cleanliness, only the decision to place one foot in front of the other, even when you no longer remember exactly why. You begin to suspect the trail possesses a dark sense of humor. Just when you feel you have adjusted to the endless grinding march across the plains, there they are, the mountains. Not the gentle hills or rolling rises of earlier weeks, but true jagged, snow-dusted monsters rising in the distance as though they have been watching your suffering and are now licking their lips. You heard stories about the Rockies back in Missouri. People called them beautiful, majestic, the spine of the continent. What they neglected to mention is that they are also the world's most relentless uphill treadmill, and you are about to climb them with a wagon held together by rope, rust, and the pure spite of your oxen. At first the incline is gentle, almost teasing. You begin ascending slowly, trading the wide-open plains for narrower, winding paths. The air grows thinner, the trees grow taller, the wind shifts, cooler now, with a sharpness that cuts through clothing and reminds you that even in August, the mountains still believe it is early spring. You stop sweating quite so much, but your joints begin composing new songs of misery. The real problem is not the climb itself, but everything the climb causes. The wagon groans with every turn of the wheel. The oxen slip on loose gravel. The brake, oh, the poor brake, is both best friend and worst enemy. It keeps you from sliding backward down a slope, yet you can hear it disintegrating a little more each time it catches. The trail narrows until sometimes there is barely room for a single wagon. When you meet another company coming down, the situation becomes a logistical nightmare. Who backs up? Who waits? Who will be the first to suggest everyone simply remain here and found a new town called Stucksville? You smile, wave, and try not to glare at the other wagons as though the entire mountain were their fault. And the turns. Good Lord, the turns. One wrong angle, and your wagon can transform from supplies for Oregon into kindling at the bottom of a ravine. You tie ropes around the rear wheels for drag. People now walk alongside the wagons with hands on the frames, guiding them around corners as though herding particularly anxious cattle. The Rocky Mountains presented one of the greatest physical obstacles on the entire Oregon Trail. Emigrants often used South Pass, a relatively gentle, though still treacherous route, in present-day Wyoming. Even the best paths required steep climbs, unpredictable weather, and exhausting physical effort. Wagons sometimes had to be disassembled, hoisted, or lowered with ropes. Entire days could be spent covering only a few miles. Some wagons were fitted with what pioneers called mountain brakes, essentially chunks of wood jammed into the wheels to create drag. Others used tree trunks or logs chained behind the wagon like sled runners. One man even lashed his mother-in-law's rocking chair beneath the rear axle for extra resistance. It worked for approximately 10 feet. Historians still discuss the psychological weight of the mountains. Some argue they marked a true point of no return. Once crossed, there was no realistic going back. Others suggest that for many, the mountains were simply another obstacle in a long sequence. Brutal, yes, but no more demoralizing than dysentery or starvation. There is also disagreement about how much preparation travelers actually possessed for the climb. The short answer is usually not enough. As you continue upward, things begin to go wrong. A wagon in your company breaks a wheel on a sharp rock. You stop and help patch it with whatever wood can be found. Then the rain begins. Not the gentle drizzle you dreamed of on hot days, but an icy slap delivered straight from the sky's unkind heart. The path turns to slippery mud. The oxen dig in, straining, grunting, losing purchase every few steps. You trudge upward with water-soaking clothing, hair, and spirit. It is the kind of rain that makes you question every decision that led to this exact moment. Yet you cannot stop. There is no level ground for camp. Only more incline, more wind, more trees that all appear to be judging you. Finally, you find a clearing barely large enough to circle the wagons. It will have to do. Everyone collapses into soggy heaps. Fires are difficult to light. The wood is too wet. You eat cold beans. Someone loses a boot in the mud. Another person swears he heard wolves. No one doubts him. That night you try to sleep curled under a damp blanket with a rock pressing into your spine, and your nose full of the smell of wet leather and quiet despair. Yet you cannot stop thinking about what still lies ahead. More mountains, more cold, and somewhere higher up, snow. You remember something an old man said weeks earlier at a trading post. The last mountain always lies. You did not understand it then. Now you do. Every peak you climb reveals another beyond it. Each pass is only a prelude to the next. The top is never truly the top, until it is. And no one ever knows in advance which one that will be. The next morning the air is crisp and cruel. Your hands are stiff with cold. Your boots are soaked through. But the view, dear God, the view, stops you mid-step. Below, the trail winds like a ribbon through green valleys. Above, the peaks shimmer with light. It is the first time in weeks that something feels genuinely beautiful, even majestic. You stand for a single second and let the silence soak in. Then, an ox lows. Someone drops a skillet, and reality resumes. Yet that view stays with you, even as you begin walking again, even as the climb continues, even as the next mountain rises into view. There is a smell you have grown used to out here, the mixture of sweat, leather, smoke, dirt, and the faint sour edge of fear. But today the air carries something new, something sharper, meatier, and strangely promising. It drifts down the slope like a memory. Someone is cooking meat, real meat, not squirrel, not the charred ends of bacon, not a stringy rabbit boiled into gray sadness. Actual meat. You nearly cry. The wagons ahead are clustered near a creek, a thin trail of smoke curling upward from a spit over a fire. A deer hangs nearby, half-skinned. Two men sit on logs, chewing slowly, heads down, looking as though they have just remembered what happiness tastes like. When you approach, they nod and raise greasy fingers. One of them even offers you a strip of venison jerky, as though it is nothing, as though it is not the most generous gift you have received in 3 states. You say thank you, and mean it with your entire body. Food on the trail has grown increasingly creative. There have been days when your only meal was a handful of beans soaked in the previous night's dishwater. You have seen people boil leather, scrape moss from rocks, and nibble the crust of old wagon bread, as though it were the last remaining fragment of civilization. The rations that once seemed sufficient, flour, cornmeal, dried pork, rice, have dwindled to crumbs and regret. Hunting is more gamble than guarantee. The deer was pure luck. The young buck walked down to the creek that morning unaware, or perhaps simply too tired to run. One clean shot, and it was down. You have not seen that kind of abundance in weeks. The meat is being rationed carefully, cooked in strips, dried for later, portioned as though it were gold. You receive your share, small, tough, and smoky, and chew it as though savoring a childhood memory. Your own stores are a sad echo of what they once were. The barrels in the wagon are nearly empty. You are down to the last of the flour, and it has turned slightly sour. The bacon is mostly grease now, wrapped in stained paper that smells of wet regret. Beans remain, perhaps enough for one more meal. Hardtack has already claimed 2 of your teeth. It is less food than a chewable threat. Most pioneers packed between 400 and 600 pounds of food per person for the journey. Despite the planning, scarcity remained a constant threat. Spoilage, poor storage, and simple miscalculation often produced shortages by the middle of the trail. Hunting helped when it succeeded, but game was frequently scarce, especially in areas already traveled by many wagons. Some pioneers attempted to make coffee by roasting grain or even acorns. Others invented alarming substitutes for eggs using flour and water mixtures or boiled plant roots. A few desperate souls brewed soup from parched corn and old ham bones and called it journey stew. No one called it good. Historians still debate how severe the food insecurity truly became. Some argue that actual starvation was rare and that stories of boiled belts and leather soup were exaggerated. Others insist those accounts were more common than later generations prefer to admit, especially during difficult terrain or prolonged delays. Diaries often hide hunger behind polite phrases. Light supper, simple meal, went without today. You call it what it is, hungry. You have gone to bed hungry more nights than you can count. Some evenings you have lied to the children and told them you already ate. Other times they have done the same for you. Hunger becomes a quiet roommate, always present, never dramatic, simply persistent, a dull reminder that you are borrowing energy from your own bones. Still you adapt. You learn which plants are edible, the bitter greens that grow near streams, the wild onions that make your hands stink but your stomach sing. You collect anything that looks remotely promising. Once you fried cattail roots. Another time you stewed something you believe was a mushroom. You survived both meals, barely. The wagon next to yours is faring worse. Their flour has gone moldy. Their last salted pork turned out to be more salt than pork. You share a little of your venison jerky with them, not because you can spare it, but because you know they would do the same for you. At least you hope they would. Out here, food is traded the way secrets are traded, carefully and with the hope it will not return to harm you. You also learn to stretch everything. Bones are boiled 3 times for broth. Pans are scraped with bread to capture every drop. Water is added to beans until the result is more bean-flavored liquid than actual meal. You pretend it is soup. You pretend a great many things out here. Every few days, someone attempts to hunt. Usually the attempt ends in disappointment. The deer and bison have long since moved ahead, pushed by the noise of hundreds of wagons and weeks of pursuit. Every missed shot feels like a personal insult. And even when a shot succeeds, the butchering and preserving take time and salt, both of which are themselves growing scarce. Still, when someone returns with anything, a bird, a rabbit, a squirrel the size of a potato, it is treated as a celebration. There is a cost, however. A young man wandered off 3 days ago, chasing a deer. He has not returned. His mother pretends he will appear at any moment. His father knows better. That night, someone makes dumplings with dried apple slices and a splash of leftover molasses. Each person receives half a dumpling. It is the best thing you have eaten in weeks. For a moment, the camp is quiet, everyone chewing slowly with eyes closed. Then someone begins to hum. Then a song starts. Something about home, or perhaps only the idea of home. You go to bed with a stomach that is not full, but is not entirely empty either. That is a victory. You sleep with the taste of venison still on your tongue, and the fire still warm at your back. Tomorrow it will be back to dry beans and regret. But tonight you have eaten. And out here that is more than enough. The first time you see the river, it does not look so formidable. Wide, yes, but calm, blue-green and glassy. The kind of water that tricks the eye into believing it is harmless. You have crossed streams before, creeks, little rivulets that barely wet the boots. This is different. This is a true river, the kind whose bottom you cannot see, the kind whose current is strong enough to drag a wagon sideways and never glance back. Your wagon master stands at the bank, arms crossed, studying the water as though it has personally insulted his family. He crouches, dips his fingers, tastes it, why, you cannot say, and frowns. Then he turns to the company with a grunt and announces that you will be fording it. The word lands like a slap. You hear it repeated up and down the line. Fording. No one cheers. No one claps. Everyone understands the risks. The river has taken wagons before. It has taken oxen. It has taken children. Fording means rolling your entire life into moving water and hoping it floats. There is a frantic hour of preparation. Everything comes out of the wagon. Food, bedding, the good frying pan. The most precious items. Photographs, keepsakes, the tiny ceramic dog your daughter insisted on bringing, are wrapped in oilcloth and prayer. Some people try to cork the seams of their wagons with pitch and rags. Others tie barrels to the sides like makeshift pontoons. You have seen some wagons float beautifully. You have seen others tip and vanish. When your turn comes, your hands tremble. The oxen step into the water uncertainly. The current seizes their legs and pulls them sideways. You grip the side of the wagon, every muscle locked. Every breath shallow. Water rushes in, cold, furious, alive, climbing over the wheels, across the floorboards, up to your ankles. You hear a barrel shift. The wagon groans. For a moment everything tilts. Then, somehow, it levels. You make it across, soaked, shaking, but intact. Not everyone does. You watch another wagon tip. It happens quickly. One wheel strikes a rock. The axle twists, and then it is over. Supplies spill into the water. Passengers scream. The canvas top collapses like a wet sail. A man jumps in after the wreckage, flailing. 2 children are pulled out by their mother, coughing and crying. The wagon floats a moment longer, then flips completely and disappears. There is no time for mourning. Others still have to cross. The river does not care. It simply continues flowing, steady and indifferent. Later you gather what can be salvaged. Bits of wood, a floating blanket, someone's skillet dented but still usable. The rest is gone. River crossings ranked among the most dangerous challenges of the entire Oregon Trail. Major rivers such as the Platte, the Snake, and the Columbia could be treacherous. Emigrants either forded them, driving the wagons straight through, or ferried across on makeshift rafts. Many drowned. Some lost every supply they possessed. Entire families were separated by the current, and some were never reunited. A few pioneers swore by floating wagons lined with ox hides, turning them into giant tubs. Others built crude rafts by lashing logs together and shoving the wagon on top. One woman famously strapped her piano to the roof in the belief it would help the wagon float. It did not. Historians still disagree about the best strategies. Some claim ferries were underused because of high cost and long waits, leading to unnecessary deaths. Others argue that fording was often the only practical choice in remote country or when time was short. Diaries reveal a mixture of careful calculation, regret, and frequent blind optimism. You spend the night on the far bank drying clothes by the fire. The children sleep in a damp pile. The oxen remain skittish, eyes wide, flanks still twitching with leftover adrenaline. You hold a steaming cup of something that only vaguely resembles coffee and stare into the dark water, still hearing its roar inside your ears. You think about what was lost: a sack of flour, a quilt, one of the chairs your husband carved last winter, and worst of all, the Bible your mother gave you, wrapped in linen and hidden at the bottom of the trunk. It slipped out somewhere in the crossing. You watched it float away, a dark rectangle bobbing on the surface like a final note. You did not cry then. Now, beside the fire, you do. The next morning, a fragile relief moves through the camp. You made it. Everyone remaining in the company is accounted for. Not whole, perhaps, but breathing. A few wagons are gone. A few faces are missing. Yet the trail continues, and therefore so do you. Someone ties a scrap of bright red cloth to a nearby tree. A marker, a memory, a warning, perhaps all three. You pack up again. The oxen shuffle forward. The wheels complain. Your boots squelch with every step. But you are across, and on the Oregon Trail that counts as a victory. You do not receive letters on the trail. That is one of the first truths that settles after the initial excitement fades and the road drum stretches long. There is no postman, no mailbox, no penciled updates about a neighbor's new baby or the state of the corn crop back in Missouri. Yet you still carry pieces of home with you, tucked into memory, crumpled into pockets, pressed between the pages of a book you have not opened in weeks. And every so often something happens that reminds you just how far away you truly are. It begins with a rumor. Someone from another wagon claims they spoke to a man at Fort Hall who carried news from the east, war brewing, or a new railway being planned, or a great storm that flattened a town. No one can confirm any of it, yet the whispers spread quickly. News out here moves like campfire smoke, thin, untraceable, always smelling slightly burned. You overhear two men arguing about whether Zachary Taylor is still president. One insists he died the previous year. The other says that is nonsense. The man was alive when they left in May. You want to tell them it does not matter. Out here, politics will not stretch the food or move the oxen. Out here, the only concern is surviving the next mile. You keep the thought to yourself. A few days later, you receive your first real letter in months. It feels like a miracle. A man on horseback, a mail rider heading east, carries a pouch of outgoing messages, and, if fortune is kind, a few replies from the last time someone made it through. Your family receives 3 letters that day. One is from your sister. Another is from a friend you barely remember. The third is from your mother. You recognize the shaky handwriting before you even open it. The words strike like a wave. Your cousin died in childbirth. The neighbor boy you once kissed on a dare is off fighting somewhere. Your youngest niece is walking now. Someone sold your father's horse, the one with the white streak down its nose. Gone. You read the letter 3 times. Then you fold it carefully and place it in your apron pocket, where the corners will curl and soften until the paper is nearly unreadable. That is all right. You will know it by heart soon enough. Mail service along the Oregon Trail was unreliable and unpredictable. Most emigrants depended on forts and trading posts to send or receive letters. Some used dead drops, leaving notes under rocks or inside hollowed trees, in the hope that the next traveler would carry them forward. Reliable postal systems did not exist in many western regions until well after major settlements were established. A few trail letters were written on bark or scraps of cloth when paper ran out. One man famously wrote to his sweetheart on a flattened tin plate using charcoal. Another carved a message into the side of a wagon tongue and left it propped against a cairn. There is no record of whether the intended recipient ever saw it. Historians disagree about how much communication actually occurred between those on the trail and those left behind. Some claim the trail was nearly silent, a complete break from life in the East. Others argue that although infrequent, the letters played a vital emotional role, providing the psychological fuel needed to continue. Many emigrants kept journals addressed to loved ones they might never see again, using the act of writing as a substitute for presence. And you do write, not every day. You are too tired for that. But sometimes, when the fire has burned low and the children are asleep, you pull out the small book, kept at the bottom of the wagon, the one with half its pages damp and its spine beginning to split. You write about the trail, about the weather, about the people you have met. You write about Lucy the cow, about the night you nearly drowned, about the stew that gave everyone gas for 3 days. Mostly you write about what you miss. You miss the way home smelled in late summer, baked earth, tomatoes on the vine, wood smoke curling from the chimney before the first frost. You miss the creak of the porch swing and the rustle of newspaper pages turned by your father's steady hands. You miss knowing even roughly what tomorrow might look like. Some days you are no longer certain who you are without the person you used to be back there. You hear others speaking of the same absences. One woman keeps a ribbon from her wedding dress in her pocket, touching it when she believes no one is watching. A man wears a child's boot on a cord around his neck. His son died near the Platte, and he has spoken little since. Another woman wears her Sunday shoes every day, even though they have nearly fallen apart. She says she wants to arrive in Oregon, looking as though she intended to get there. And then there are the ghosts. Not the spectral kind, though the trail has plenty of places that feel haunted, but the memories that walk beside you, the old routines, the voices you have not heard in months, the way your sister used to hum while peeling apples, the feel of your mother's hand smoothing your hair. These are not things you can pack, yet they travel with you anyway. Sometimes the remembering hurts. Sometimes it is the only thing that keeps you moving. You find yourself whispering stories as you walk. Out loud, just barely. You tell your daughter about the schoolhouse with the crooked bell tower and the chalk that always broke in your hand. You tell your son about the old dog you had as a child, the one that snored louder than your grandfather. You tell yourself you will remember everything. You try. But the trail changes you. By the time you reach the edge of the Blue Mountains, you no longer look like the person who left Missouri. Your face is leaner, your clothes no longer fit the same, and your eyes have taken on that distant, forward-looking stare that scans the horizon and does not linger long on what lies behind. You still carry the letters in your pocket. You still read them on quiet nights. But you no longer cry over them, not because they matter less, but because you have simply grown better at carrying the weight. You have been dreaming of Oregon for months. It was always the golden idea on the horizon, the whispered promise of rich soil and fat cattle, of trees so tall they block the sun, of rain, glorious, abundant rain, to wash the dust from your lungs and turn the dirt green. But when you finally reach the edge of it, when the last of the mountains fall away and you begin the descent into the Willamette Valley, it does not feel like triumph. It feels as though you have arrived late to a gathering no one told you had been canceled. The trees are real, yes, towering pines and firs that smell of sap and shade, and the possibility of new beginnings. The air is thick and heavy with dampness, a strange sensation after months of breathing dust and dry wind. The land rolls in soft waves, covered in tangled brush and stubborn mud. And it is raining. Not a polite drizzle, but a full, cold, miserable downpour that seeps into everything. Boots, bedding, the very idea of happiness. This is not how you pictured it. There is no cheering, no banner welcoming you to Oregon, no parade waiting to celebrate your arrival. Only mud. Mud everywhere. Wagon wheels sink into it. Shoes disappear. Your oxen look at you with the blank stare of animals that have endured a great deal and will not be amused by one more inconvenience. You make camp, or what passes for camp. There is no dry ground. You try to stretch a tarp over the wagon to keep the rain out, but it sags in the middle and dumps a bucket of cold water into the flour barrel. You try not to scream. Instead, you sit under the wagon, soaked to the bone, gnawing on a piece of soggy bread, and wondering what exactly you traveled all this way to find. When emigrants finally reached the Willamette Valley, many were shocked to discover it was less a paradise and more a soggy, overgrown wilderness. Arrival typically came in late fall, which meant heavy rains, few established settlements, and land that had to be cleared by hand. It took years of backbreaking labor before the promise of Oregon became reality for most. Some pioneers were so disappointed by the conditions that they simply left, heading south toward California, or back east if they could afford the return. Others stayed out of pure stubbornness. One woman famously declared upon arrival, "If this is Eden, I want a refund." Historians still debate whether the trail produced a sense of fulfillment upon arrival, or primarily disillusionment. Some argue that completing the journey instilled a deep sense of purpose and resilience, even when the reward was modest. Others suggest that the harsh reality of Oregon exposed the trail's myth for what it largely was, a propaganda-fueled gamble sold to desperate people. You lean toward the second view, at least today, because what you possess now is wet blankets, a dozen broken spokes, and a patch of brushy land someone pointed at and called yours. No fences, no cabin, no waiting hearth. Only the overwhelming task of beginning again from nothing. The trail is over, yes. The work is not even close. You look at the others. Some are unpacking with mechanical determination, as though they have switched off the part of the mind that screams for comfort. Others simply sit blank-faced, waiting for someone to tell them what to do next. A few are already speaking of next spring, as though the previous 6 months did not try to kill them on a weekly basis. You understand them, because despite everything, the hunger, the cold, the losses, you are still here. The trail did not defeat you. It changed you, stripped you down, and rebuilt you with calloused hands and a spine made of gritted teeth. And you are not alone. You think of the people you met, those still walking beside you, and those you buried along the way. You think of Pickles the goat, who vanished somewhere near the Columbia River, last seen eating a hat. You think of Lucy the cow, who limped through her final 100 miles, and now grazes nearby as though she owns the place. You think of the letters in your pocket and the home you left behind. The trail is not merely something you walked. It is something that now lives inside your body, in the scars, in the stories, in the knowledge that you can light a fire in the rain, using 3 twigs and a sideways glance. You could survive almost anywhere now. That is what the trail gave you. One night around the fire, someone produces a bottle of something that smells of both regret and celebration. You pass it around. No one says much. The rain has finally stopped. The stars appear as though they have forgotten to remain angry. Someone begins humming that old tune again, the one that has followed you since Kansas. Others join softly, as though afraid the song will vanish if sung too loudly. You think of what was lost, a sister, a friend, your Bible, the simple, small life you once knew. But you also think of what was found, grit, community, stories, and a quiet power that comes from surviving something you probably should not have survived. You are in Oregon now. It is not the dream they sold you. It is wetter, rougher, meaner in its own way. But it is also yours. You sleep under a tarp that still leaks and dream of building something that does not. Tomorrow the real work begins, but tonight you made it. You are lying on your back now inside a structure that can barely be called a house. 4 walls, a roof that leaks a little, a stove that sometimes functions, a mattress of straw that pokes through the sheet as though it holds a grudge. Yet it is not a wagon. It is not the cold, hard ground under open sky. It is shelter. It is a beginning. Outside, the wind moves through the trees. Those tall Oregon pines that stood like obstacles the day you arrived and now feel like protection. You have cleared a little land, planted seeds, lost most of them. 1 or 2 have sprouted. That is something. You close your eyes and see the trail again. The endless walking, the stampedes, the grave on the hill you never had time to mark properly, the ridiculous goat, the mountain that almost broke both the wagon and you. Somehow all of it feels both distant and present at once, as though it has been etched into the bone. You are not the person who left Missouri. That earlier version of you would not last 10 minutes here. You are harder now, quieter, yet also somehow more grateful for the smallest things. A dry sock, a warm meal, a friendly voice that asks for nothing in return, and sleep. Blessed, dreamless sleep. Tomorrow you will begin again. Clear more brush, patch the roof, try to build something lasting, something that might justify all the walking. But for now you listen to the wind and let it sing you toward rest, because the trail is behind you, and whatever comes next is finally yours to walk by choice.